Hello, everyone. Hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day. This is a conversation I had with Temporal a couple of months ago. It was actually a Sunday after the Friday where I released my tanking design space video, where I had a nice long chat with him. This is the first half of the chat that covers all of the videos, and I thought it might be interesting to cut in some commentary, as you see down here to the right of me, that is going to kind of explain my thought process, where I was lacking, where I was developing my thoughts, and that sort of stuff as I went through this conversation, because I found it absolutely incredibly engaging and amazing. And I really enjoyed this chat. You will enjoy it too, I promise. Please put it on as a podcast as you go for a walk or something along those lines. It was one of the best conversations I've had in a very long time. I hope you enjoy it.
So today we have Realth here. We've got you, and this is interesting. I did originally reach out to you based on the post that you made. And this is, of
Sure.
course, your post about the tanking design space synergy. You called it a swan song for Overwatch. That makes
Yes.
us a little bit sad. Makes me sad, at least. But I wanted to get into this because you had some controversial opinions here. So rather than go over the whole post, which we might do because, we geek out about Overwatch, but rather than that, can you sort of give us like your thesis or what you'd consider the main takeaway, sort of the most important part about this? Because you do a lot of laying the groundwork here. You've got your initiation tanks, you've got your different categories of off tank, that sort of thing. But can
Mhm.
you sort of go, what's the conclusion that you're ending up getting to with all of this? What's your thesis?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't got to the conclusion yet.
Oh, okay.
That's the sad point at the moment.
Okay.
This is kind of a groundwork video that I made to set the basis, because I started a video originally on 5v5, and immediately after the 5v5 announcements, I started working on it, and within, I'd say, about 2 months, I realized there was too little knowledge of tanking in general to be able to actually discuss it with anyone.
Okay.
Nobody could actually just like have a conversation without thinking that I was maybe playing into a bit more than I could know about how it's going to be when it releases.
Sure.
Right, so it was this kind of situation where I realized I needed to do some groundwork first. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to make a general like tanking design space video. So what I actually did in the video is essentially I defined design space, and then I laid out tank categories, and I attempted to categorize the tanks not by how that actually played in comps,
Sure.
but instead doing it by the type of resources they either take from friends or they give to other friends, right? So there's the idea here of the initiators that accept resources. There's the off tanks that give resources in a strong burst to the main tank.
Sure.
And there's poking tanks that give slow, gradual resources to an angle instead of a person for the most part.
Is that really is that how you'd frame it? Because I felt like when you went with sort of those off angle, what you refer
Mhm.
to them as here was the poke enabling off tanks, and you went pretty
Yeah.
big on how they enable a DPS on an off angle. Like that really seemed to be a part of the definition of sorts, and
Yeah.
that's fine. Do you consider it necessary for there to be a DPS on those off angles, or do you feel like they're supporting an angle?
Sure, it's certainly not necessary to be with a DPS on that off angle, and you wouldn't see that in. If I was coaching, say, a gold or plat player, I'd literally just tell them to go take that angle regardless, right?
Okay.
You don't need a DPS with you to make it valid. Just having the damage coming from a good angle is good enough.
Okay.
But if you, for instance, had a duo queue and you'd be able to pair, say, Sigma going off on an off angle with, say, a soldier,
Sure.
and they peek that corner, and the soldier's actually enabled to stand there for a couple of seconds. That's where, and as you get higher, this is really where the game goes, right?
Sure.
It's not to do with these solo plays. It's more to do with having these two separate angles that both enable each other, and not being able to push either one out because you can rotate around.
Three is kind of the magic number, I'd argue. But yeah, okay.
Well, as many as possible, really,
Okay, okay.
within reason.
Mercy wants her own angle, man. Mercy wants her own angle. Sixth angle. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Okay, that's fair. Um, okay, so you'd say it's really about this second angle then, but how does that fit into the resource game then? Because you really make a distinction here
Yeah.
between your, like, the initiators are really the heroes that can receive resources and do something with them. And I'd like you to get more into that and what that means. Like, what's the difference between Winston doing something with resources between, say, Diva or Orisa doing something with resources? Because you've controversially said Orisa is not an initiator, mostly based on that not using using resources well definition. But
Mhm.
also, what's sort of the difference between these? Okay, if it's about holding an off angle, what's the difference between Sigma doing it and Hanzo doing it? If it's about the angle and it's not being able to like protect a DPS on that angle anymore, how or Tracer doing it, whatever the case there.
Okay, so first off, why I'm actually talking about resources to begin with, instead
Sure.
of just talking about how the design works in general, come straight back to that. Obviously, the reason why I'm rooting it in the discussion about resources is because when you design heroes,
Hmm.
the biggest thing that gets out of hand first is the ways that they interact.
Sure.
Right. So if Blizzard were going to design, say, 3 new tank heroes, the first thing that they should be looking at is how they interact with other heroes, specifically where they get resources and how they give resources to other characters. That's why I framed the discussion there. And that's kind of like the routing of what I want to go on to in next videos, where I actually am going to talk about what other heroes could be introduced into a 6v6 format. In terms of why I think that Orisa and Diva and that kind of person is different in the way that they actually get resources.
Hmm.
Obviously, every character does more with extra resources, but with characters like Winston, Ryan, and Bull, which are the 3 initiators that I pinned down,
Hmm.
if I quickly draw, because you know what,
Please.
epic pens exist for a reason. There's this kind of pressure cycle idea, and I went over it reasonably in depth when I actually did the video.
Sure.
The idea is that as we pressure, and this exists on Reinhardt as you're swinging, and then obviously you have to stop swinging when you get low enough to shield or to stop cooldowns like flash, sleep, stun, or hook or discord, stuff like that.
Sure.
As you're doing that, you have this kind of like ramping up of pressure as you swing into more and more people. And so as you do it, you get this pressure goes up, pressure goes back down pretty sharpish when you put your shield back up. And this kind of exists
Sure.
on every single one of these 3 heroes, right? But the ways that they actually interact to make this pressure cycle better when given more resources is different on certain heroes. So if I was to pair Orisa, if Orisa opens an angle with shield, let's say King's Row first, right? So
Sure.
we've got the statue in the middle. Orisa does a very short rotation around the right side. Maybe we're doing a Orisa Rhyme pairing. Rhyme pressures main. Orisa does a short rotation with McCree around right side, plonks down a shield. If we weren't with the Reinhardt and instead we were Zarya,
Hmm.
the only thing that the bubble gives Orisa is a longer time, right? So it only gives her this much extra. So it's a little bit of extra time in the angle.
Right.
Orisa really doesn't care about these extra resources like the other tanks do. But when a character like Rhine pressures, because their pressure is more bursty and
Right.
is very like impactful straight away, what ends up happening is, as well as this additional time in the angle, they also get to cleave more. Right? So there's this effect where not only do you make the pressure cycle longer, but you make it taller. And by the way, this is pressure here versus time if I were to draw the graph.
Okay.
So there's this kind of like compounding or multiplying effect when certain characters that can cleave, especially in close range. I really do think close range is the crux of this issue. They just get extra out of bursty resources than gradual or poking tanks. And so if I was to compare this to Rhine, obviously it's a bubble when he swings. It stops the threat of purges, stops in hand to block, flash, nade, stun, discord, etc., etc.
Hmm.
DM's exactly the same as a resource. But if I were to compare Sigma Shield going to try and enable Ryan doing the same thing, or Sigma Shift maybe. Firstly, Sigma can't go off on an off angle, so that's bad. But secondly, the resources don't really directly affect him. They can't be applied very well to him, and Sigma can do better things with those resources.
Wait,
Right,
you
so
mean Reinhardt can do better things with the resources?
I think Sigma can do better things himself with those resources instead of donating it to the
Oh,
Reinhardt while he
got it,
pressures.
got it, got it. Okay, got it. Sorry, I was thinking we were talking applying resources to the Sigma. Okay, got it. So I guess
Mhm.
where I'd pick at this here is sort of like we've sort of hit the crux of you. So you went with
Right.
pressure cycles, and initiators have these pressure cycles where they do pressure during stuff, and that makes sense in dive. That makes sense in brawl. We trade out resources, and then we sort of
Mhm.
back out. It might be, hey, our Reinhardt goes in, we take down their Reinhardt, we put our shield up, we stabilize, and then we go for more. Or a dive happens. Maybe it was a soft dive, maybe it was a hard dive. We back out, reset our cooldowns. We can hit a harder dive at that point. We can go for a second elimination and then chain it. That all makes sense, and that's pretty typical. But are you suggesting that Orisa doesn't have pressure cycles? I mean, what is
No,
halt?
no.
What is barrier? Okay, go ahead.
Of course not. Yeah. There is a side issue here, is that Orisa has been made to be a main tank by Blizzard,
Okay.
kind of by force. I mean, all of her designs since her release, apart from the very fact that she pokes, has been towards being a main tank. But there's kind of a problem, and I'll go into that with a second with Orisa.
Sure.
Every character in the game has pressure cycles. Everyone has buttons that they
Right.
press at the same time. They do extra things. I mean, it's not controversial. It's just the way that they actually gain resources from other people is different, right? So it's the idea of if I were to Sigma Shield an Orisa, that gives her a long time in an angle. If I were to DM an Orisa, that's 2 seconds in an angle. If I were to
Sure.
bubble her, that's about 1 second in an angle. They just don't gain the same amount from these resources. And sure, everything ends in a brawl. And if you're going to play these two characters,
Sure.
maybe Diva and Orisa we're talking about, which have been played quite a lot recently.
Mhm.
We're going to play them as a poking combination, as they normally get played, a reasonably close range, happy to brawl poking combination.
Sure.
Then we not only do we not really want to donate our DM to the Orisa, but most of the time we want to use it for other things than the Orisa, right? Even in her really strong initiating, like she puts out a shield, she opens a strong angle. Most of the time we wouldn't want to DM for even 1 second on that shield. Most of the time we'd instead of giving it to the tanks, we throw it straight at the DPS, right? We put the DPS in an angle, we keep them in a place for like 2 more seconds, or we'd instead, because obviously there's a great anti-dive comp, we use it to cancel out the enemy team's pressure cycles, right? So this is the kind of effect where you're playing a poke enabling off tank, which is what I
Right.
call the Orisa, with a tank enabling off tank as Diva,
Mhm.
and these bursty resources from Diva end up being better used to stop the enemy's pressure than they are donated to the Orisa when she does something.
Right, but like we would always expect Orisa, we would always expect anyone, like the same thing of when we
Mhm.
donate our Zarya bubble to our Reinhardt, because those are
Yeah.
we've got our similar, well, we don't have our similar two types of tank there. You would argue that Reinhardt and Orisa are different, but like part of what
Mhm.
our Zarya bubble is doing, at least when we get into those first bubble or two, is part of it is, yes, it's enabling our Reinhardt to swing, and that's cool, and you're talking about how Orisa doesn't really get as much value out of that, but part of what it's doing is it's making our Reinhardt not get blown up while I swing. It's denying the
Mhm.
fact that the opponents have to match our pressure cycle, and now they can't, or they actually have to with their own Zarya bubble, etc. So is that really different? Like you're saying, oh, it's different with Diva when she DMs to protect Orisa because it's allowing her to. It's not really helping Orisa's cycle. It's breaking the opponent's cycle. Is that really different? You see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't talking about breaking the opponent's cycle straight away. What I was
Okay.
talking about is when Orisa puts out that shield.
Hmm.
We can quickly jump into King's Row first and show you if you
Sure,
want.
please,
But,
please.
but, but when Orisa puts out that shield, she really doesn't gain anything substantial by having extra resources. She really just gains more time. And that's really the fundamentals of it. There's no compounding effect for having extra stuff into that. And I knew this would be the sticking point, which is why when I did the talk about Orisa in the video, I
Sure,
kind of did a little coy smile, didn't I? I kind of knew exactly what was coming back my way
you did.
because Orisa has always been referred to as a main tank.
Sure.
I just really don't think it describes the way that the resource actually trade between the heroes. So for instance, if we put let's say the defending team are in a brawl comp more or less
Hmm.
on close corner, right?
Sure.
If we were going to go in a poking comp against them, maybe we're going to rotate all the way up round, maybe we're just going to pull ourselves wide. Arista puts down shield.
Okay.
What would Diva do in this situation if we're playing that? Would Diva DM the shield to give more time in the angle, or would that be like a bad use of the resources?
I
Would we
mean,
rather save? Sorry, go ahead.
sorry. Sorry, we both do this because we do too much fun review.
Yeah,
We talk about the game too much.
way too
I mean,
much.
generally, she's going to threaten a different angle here. She's going to clear out the threat. She could potentially go top
Hmm.
right if we were actually set here to put some pressure on the back line. She could
Yep,
potentially play left side statue if she wanted. I mean, there's some
yep.
options, but yes, if the actual brawl came out, if we were up against a brawl and there was a May wall on our Orisa, she'd come over and DM our Orisa.
Yeah, but that's when the enemy team pressure cycles into you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's more like if the enemy team were to get into a brawl kind of situation. Sure, we're going to donate the resources there, but as a poking solution, opening this angle with the Orisa,
Hmm.
we just don't get very much from it. We'd rather just save the 2 seconds of DM to say like maybe the enemy team's McCree has just popped out here and we're going to use it on this. I wouldn't even bother DMing an Orisa shield when she opened the
Oh, of
angle.
course not. Yeah.
That's the thing. So in terms of canceling out the enemy pressure cycles, yeah, but we wouldn't do that at the initiation, right?
Sure.
Cool. So that's essentially the crux of the issue
I
that I'm looking for.
Okay. So we wouldn't do that on the initiation.
Hmm.
But isn't that like sort of generally true. I mean, now we're going to get to our poke enabling off tanks here. And
Sure.
if you have, let's say, instead of putting that diva, since we were just on King's Road there, we've rotated over and we've put a soldier on that, on the off angle, maybe over onto the right above them. Maybe they've been able to deepen it, whatever. Like, we look at that, we wouldn't necessarily
Mhm.
throw out the Orisa shield to protect them there until they started to get pressured themselves either, right? Like, we don't pre-deploy Sigma shields, for example, pre-deploy Orisa shields. We actually want some threat coming our way. So that's kind of the
Sure.
same as we don't actually pre-deploy our bubble or our DM on someone going, oh, we expect them to take damage. We do it when they're already taking damage.
Mhm.
Whether it's, you get a little bit of an exception for Reinhardt because his damage is so predictable, and a little bit for Winston because they're like, are
Yeah.
you getting into that the damage is so predictable when it's coming in that it makes sense to Zarya bubble your Monkey, your Winston, your Reinhardt consistently at times? Like, is that really the crux of the issue here?
I think the idea is that the simple pressure cycle that you create by getting this cleaving effect, getting more damage onto better targets as well,
Mm-hmm.
creates so much more pressure on the enemy team and like takes so many more resources away from them compared to using it defensive, even to cancel out the enemy. That's the thing. We don't want to use it defensively. We want to use everything offensively. Find our solution for what the enemy team does. Hey, this is older Realth here. I think I made a horrible mistake here. And I probably could have solved the entire conversation if my brain was actually working at the time. It's not that the damage coming in is predictable and you want to block as much as possible with Bubble and DM, so you apply it to the Reinhardt as he brawls. It's that the Reinhardt actually gets more damage from his brawl by having extra resources applied to him, which isn't the same as when you apply it to, say, a poking angle or an Orisa. So why would we pair these two this off tank that wants to do a very big burst of resources
Mm-hmm.
with this poking tank that wants to do gradual resources that can keep somebody in an angle for, say, like 5 or 6 seconds, right? It's kind of like this miss timing that I'm talking about.
And
So these
okay.
characters, the initiators, these are the ones that get compounding effects from having extra resources put into them. And these are the kind of ones that, you know what, if they get lamped when they're doing the thing they want to do,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not Bull, but Reinhardt and Winston would definitely be happy about that. And that's basically the infinite resource generator, right? Zarya and Diva, these are very bursty. They can donate their resource to other things, but they don't necessarily want to do that. They're more happy if they can donate it to someone doing something proactive. And there's the guys, the poke enabling ones, that just donate all their resources towards taking stronger angles and keeping those angles. And I really do think that there is no way to design a poking tank
Mm-hmm.
in a way that has a compounding effect from bursty resources. I
Well,
think this is just
what if
just
we just
incorrect.
design more bursty resources like BAP's window or Mercy's damage boost?
Short window and damage boost, those are absolutely amazing. I'm happy with resources in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that would work. But the thing is, the resources like window and damage boost are just kind of like too extreme. These are kind of like ultimate solution resources. Whereas I'm talking about the general resources you have on a character. You'd never put something as good as like group damage boost. I actually have no idea whatsoever what went wrong in my brain there. I just immediately started fumbling and completely missed my words. And obviously, I'm not disingenuous enough to cut it out because it's me being stupid. But man, I completely misrepresented everything that I think in one sentence. I guess the real answer I should have been able to give that would have kept the conversation more or less on track is there's a difference between a like 100% damage boost that you can apply to anyone for like 2 seconds compared to a 30% damage boost that you can apply to people for an infinite amount of time. Right? These are two different intensities of resources. One's bursty, one isn't bursty. Therefore, even though you would apply the bursty resource to DPS if they're in a good angle, in a good spot in order to do stuff, you'd rather just apply it to a Winston as he dives in or Bull slamming. And obviously, if we put a 2 second 100% damage boost into the game, it would completely break the game in general just because these pressure cycles exist. And that's really the difference here, the gradual resources versus the bursty resources. I don't know if I didn't have these rooted properly in my head when I did this conversation, or whether I've improved myself over time, or whether was just fumbling, honestly. And obviously, Temporal immediately smells blood in the water. He knows there's weakness here, and he's gonna bite. Oh god, I love it. as like a group damage boost onto
No,
a
no, no. I
like
mean,
plain
like
hero.
Mercy single damage boosting and
Mhm.
Orisa, like the generally that's not where we spend our damage boost because we'd rather spend it on an angle, and we might get into hey, Orisa should be on angles more often, which I don't necessarily fully disagree with. That's just a little bit of a separate discussion. Um, but like I don't know that going hey, Mercy is donating damage boost to Orisa. How is that different other than Mercy's in a support role? But that's a bit arbitrary, whereas Zarya's in a tank role.
Yeah, I certainly think this kind of idea of donating resources to tanks
Hmm.
versus DPS and angle support is something that carries over directly to healer role. I think there's a
Okay.
direct line from let's say Zarya Bubble and
Hmm.
Lamp to something like Harmony and let's say Sigma Shield. Right,
Okay.
I think these kind of resources are best used in completely different situations. And sure, they can be used in the opposite situation. You can Harmony Orb a Reinhardt and you can lamp a Orisa on an angle. But these things are completely misused if we use them that way. So that's really what I'm talking about when I just talk about the total space that you can design things. If you design bursty resources, they're most best used during a pressure cycle. If you design longer lasting, keep
Hmm.
somebody in a place resources, they're much better used on a DPS or somebody that has. So, for instance, you can design a heal over time, basic stuff, kind
Hmm.
of harmony orb stuff, and that will always be better on a DPS in an angle that will be on a Reinhardt. Obviously, you can do that if you want ult or something like that, but it will always be better towards the wings.
And at this point here, I kind of lost it. I'd lost the through line of my own argument. I've lost the grounding in where Temporal was in order to build on what I want to lead him to. I kind of just went off on whatever. I think you can just kind of call this fumbling more than anything. And as one more note before I play it again, I think Temporal was actually relatively kind here. He actually tried to go out as far on a limb as possible to kind of like reach me off the branch I'd pulled myself out on.
Well, I mean, I agree that there's a difference between Harmony Orb and Bubble, Lamp, and Damage Boost. Like, I agree that there are some differences there and how those work, of course. I'm still not quite sure I'm seeing it in terms of, like, is it not okay because it's ultimate level or because it's too much of Mercy's kit to do that? Like, I guess I'm getting into this. I'm not quite seeing enough validation for the distinction because our real thing around initiators was, hey, they receive resources from other heroes or maybe specifically from off tanks, but then our definition of initiators is tied to our definition of off tanks. Um, they receive resources and they get a multiplicative effect, and it's just really hard to be like, no, but Orisa doesn't get a multiplicative effect on her initiation from having a window. Yes, she does. Like, yeah, or if window's too powerful, a mercy damage boost or a discord out there, and you could say, no, those are too permanent, but then window isn't permanent. So like,
I
I need the gradation here.
And thank God he gave me like 50 seconds in order to actually think through what the hell I think and actually collect my thoughts here because I would have just kept squirming otherwise. And I think I more or less picked myself up reasonably well at this point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand. I think what I'd say is that the Orisa Roadhog and Sigma, which are the ones down here,
Hmm.
these get an additive effect from extra resources.
Okay.
So if you give them a 50% damage boost, they're getting 50% more damage. There's no cleaving effect, and there's no cancelling out of stuff to stop them, which is what you really get with Winston, Ball, and Reinhardt. There's no extra stuff that you get from it. You just get, if you're damage boosting, but just say you're healing Orisa, you're literally just holding the Orisa in the angle.
Hmm.
Versus if that Mercy Beam was converted into a 300 damage burst, a healing burst over a second, right? That's
Hmm.
so much of a better resource to donate to Reinhardt, and you definitely wouldn't donate it to the Orisa. So there's a difference between the resources. Are you following me there, or am I speaking in circles?
Yes, you are speaking in circles, Ralph. You made no sense whatsoever. You went in a circle, and you knew it because you needed to ask him if you were speaking in circles. Essentially, what happened here is I wasn't ready in my brain to answer the question about damage boost, so I just sidetracked it onto healing. Obviously, I'm fine with answering it now. There's no problem with damage boost. I just explained it earlier. But it really does show the progression in my thought process because you think about when this was done. This was right after my first tanking video, right? I hadn't made my second one where I clearly laid it out and actually showed how to create tanks into the future. I was actually learning quite a lot during this, just having to form my own thoughts. Because until someone questions you, I guess you never really know what you think unless you force yourself to think these thoughts out loud. And I guess I can again only thank Temporal for being so kind in the conversation. I seen him rip other people apart, and I feel like he knew there was something interesting here if he could only get it out of me.
Am I speaking in circles?
Little bit of both, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I look at that and you say you'd never donate like a instant 100 heal to Orisa if you had the option to donate it to a Reinhardt, at least until it was the enemy's pressure cycle. Um, and I
Mhm.
sort of get that,
Sure.
but I go, but is that really any different than like you're again, you say this from like a perspective of donating this resource is so much better. Like it helps Reinhardt more than it helps the Orisa. And the heal one, I think
Mhm.
I'd agree with, but again, we can do this from a damage direction because we already have. We've thought about things like Nano, where Winston gets better off of Nano than Orisa does. Like that's a place that you went with this,
Yeah,
I
and
believe, in your.
that's the perfect example. I didn't actually go there, but that's a
Oh,
perfect
okay.
example. Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
No. So
Yeah.
like so that would be something that you would agree that hey, Winston gets more than that than Orisa, at
Mhm.
least when we're not being pushed. If your Orisa's being pushed, the Nano can make
Mhm.
sense. But anyways, Winston is generally going to get more off of that. And that I'd agree with, that Winston gets more out of that resource. But again, I'd pull that right back and go, but I'm not really convinced that's different than we sort of get into what our resource is. Like, is an angle
Sure.
is having a friend on an angle a resource? Is damage a resource, or is it only these things that we think of like damage boost, harmony orb, nano? Are those the only things that are resources? Because we really get into
Yeah.
this where like what Orisa wants to make her pressure cycle so much better is a TNT thrown into her halt, the Doomfist slam on her halt, that sort of thing. Like, and we might go,
Yes.
well, those are damage, but like I don't really know that damage isn't just another resource,
Yeah,
because
and you
angles
could
are
argue
just
that
another resource.
those
Go ahead.
resources get better, the TNT and the Doomfist, by good staging that you need earlier, right? It's not
Sure.
made better by specific things. The whole and the dynamite is made good by the positioning of the Orisa and the Ash in the first place, right?
Sure, but I
And
would
not
say the
necessarily the
TNT is making
resources
the
put
halt
into it.
better, was more the point I was going to there, the same way the
Yeah,
Nano's making the
sure.
Winston Cleave better.
I'd,
Okay.
I'd say Halt is a departure and a different type of resource. Really, what the most things that I'm talking about here is Bubble, DM, and the two shields.
Hulk's a bit of an interesting ability, and I really think I brushed this off way too easily because I just wanted to focus on the healing or defensive resources characters could give each other. Hulk is the same, okay? Hulk can be donated to an initiator in order to increase the size of their pressure cycle. Orisa doesn't work very well with Winston, but with Bull, that Bull comp does like using Hulk in order to increase the pressure cycle. And the Orisa Rhine comp does like using Hulk to increase the Rhine's pressure cycle. I really do think there's a higher level of the argument that we never really got to here, which I'd like to just spell out quickly. Any type of resources can be donated to tanks, and they can be donated to DPS, either the initiators or the DPS in an angle. Now, the question is, what are they doing? If the DPS isn't in an angle, it doesn't matter what resources you put on the DPS, they're not going to do any work. And if the tank isn't in a position in order to initiate, it doesn't matter how bursty the resource you put on the Reinhardt is, he's not going to be able to do anything with it. So there's certainly an amazing amount of crossover here between the two. Now, in terms of doing something bursty to the enemy team like Hull, really the question there is exactly the same. Is the DPS in an angle? Is your initiator able to pressure cycle into the offensive ability? Either one of these can cause a massive effect. Now, there aren't very many offensive abilities that interact with other heroes, but you really do need to ask the question, if we have a gradual damage, and Temporal was saying here that damage he could be considered a resource, should we be putting that into the pressure cycle on main, or should we be using that in order to enable a DPS in an angle by preventing them being poked out of the angle by DPS challenging them? Certainly, I think in order to have a full picture of the design space, you really do need to include all of the interacting abilities between two teammates. And Holt should be in that conversation. I just wasn't prepared to talk about it here.
Okay.
I'd say Halt is a departure and a different type of resource. Really, what the most things that I'm talking about here is Bubble, DM, and the two shields. Obviously, Fortify is used in a different scenario most of the time than the shield would be used, or tries to be used later, obviously for point pressure.
But they're really not, because that's not the resources I'm comparing. Like, you're saying TNT
I-
is different than these, but I'm saying no. The comparison for TNT is the bubble, the shield, the things like that, because that's the resource that the tank wants effectively. Like, it's not like what's actually happening is the bubble is making Reinhardt's W and swing better. The nano is
yeah.
making Winston's, or the bubble is making Winston's
Cool.
cleave better. The DM is making Ball's pile drive better, maybe. That's what would happen. Well, the TNT is making Orissa's halt better. Like, we're already making our initiators initiations better with these other resources. So is TNT really different? I just want to be clear. I'm comparing TNT to the bubble or the DM there in that.
I think what he's trying to say, and I'm not trying to misrepresent him, is that the Hulk is comparable to the bubble and the DM, in that the Hulk can be given to the initiator or poking angle the same way that DM and bubble can to increase the size of their pressure cycle. And the initiated pressure cycle is based on the amount of resources he gets while he's doing his pressure cycle, whereas the DPS's pressure cycle is not based on the amount of resources they get in a raw sense, but based on how deep that angle is in order to use their DPS abilities like dynamite. So that's why I think the distinction is.
Okay, so the TNT in terms of obviously this is a complementary pressure cycle, right?
Sure.
This is two people doing things at the same time. They press their buttons. We get a compounding effect.
Right.
But first off, if a off tank had this, this would be an excellent poking tank tool if they had dynamite in order to combine. But this is again two characters interacting and throwing their resources together. If we just compare in the tank category, there's really only two types of resources at the moment. There's bursty resources and there's kind of like limited resources. And if you, I guess the other side of it is that the TNT and the Halt are aggressive abilities towards the enemy, whereas these resources we're talking about are the kind of like palliative or just resource.
I left this in for context. It doesn't really add anything. In fact, I pretty much just derailed the conversation in terms of this 20-second period. Yeah, I just wasn't ready for it, so we'll continue.
But that's how you wanted to use. Oh, okay. Sorry, I was thinking you were going somewhere else. I would say, like, yes, TNT is an aggressive thing, but the way you wanted to use bubble and the way you wanted to use DM is also aggressive. You're not talking about those in a peel cycle. You're talking about those in an aggression cycle. But okay, you're saying it's because it's specifically into the character. But again, I sort of go at that and go, okay, they're designed a little bit differently in how it's done. But I'm not sure that distinction is necessarily that useful, because again, it's the sort of thing where it's like, okay, so if we so would the design space be we have to apply some sort of not damage boost, but like maybe an off tank applies something to Orisa that makes her shots explode on impact or something? Would then she now be like, you see where I'm going with this?
So we're talking about a bursty resource from an off tank that applies to one of the poking tanks and makes their sightline very temporarily threatening. Right?
Sure.
That's what you're talking about. That is a bursty resource that could apply, but at the same time, the angle itself doesn't change, and the people you can actually shoot doesn't change. And that really, what we're talking about is just packing extra resources behind an angle to make it unstoppable for the enemy team. There.
So there just can't be a Pokemon tank. I mean, like, that's where we're getting with you. Okay, you don't think so. Why is that useful to say that? Why is it useful to have a place? And again, I know we're sort of going into what's potentially the next video here, so if you don't want to go there, that's fine.
No, but, I'm happy to do everything.
Great. So why is it useful to be like, no, there's 4 ways to play the game, which I think we disagree with a little bit, but you went with there's 4 ways to play the game here in terms of poke, dive, brawl, and poke hybrids. And then you're going to say in this that we have initiators for for brawl and dive, but we're never going to have initiators for poke. Like, why is it useful to think of it like that? Is it just because it helps us understand the resource pour in better? Because like we've gotten somewhat nuanced on this resource pour in here. So like resources for aggression can, from an off tank specifically, be poured into a main tank. Again, we've gone back to your initiator definition is tied to off tanks existing. So maybe we need to next go to our off tank thing, because Orisa does make sense if we are able to use BAP's window, for example, as a thing. Like resources can be poured into her to make her better at initiation. Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, they can be poured into all of these tanks on an angle.
Sure.
But I say that pouring these resources into any of these tanks on an angle is fundamentally no different than pouring them into a DPS on the same angle.
But isn't
If we're
I oh
talking about
no no
straight
no no
damage
no no no
kind of
no no
stuff,
no no
right?
stop stop
I'm not
stop
I'm not
stop
changing the
stop
topic.
stop. No, and the reason I'm gonna stop is
Yeah.
okay, is Doomfist, Reaper, and May initiation main tanks?
Yes.
Okay,
They are the type of resource that I'm looking for.
right,
Yes.
because that's my point. Like my point is, they all very much enjoy DM and bubbles on them as
Mhm.
they're sort of doing
Yeah.
it. So into this, we'd look at them, and May being a tank, that's obviously been. We remember 3 years ago when that was
There's
big
problems with
as
it. Yeah, there's problems.
a
Some of
thing.
the abilities interact with other tanks in kind of bad ways, especially
Sure,
Reinhardt. If you pair Reinhardt and May, you're having a bad time as the other team. Sure.
sure, sure.
Um,
Um, Okay, so you would say, like, again, we're really just getting into, so for them to be an initiator, they have to really be able to take advantage of that short
yeah.
burst window. So, like, in your initiator category, those three would really belong. And you're saying, yes, they do belong, though we obviously don't think of them as tanks
Do
most of the time.
May. They need significant reworks to fit into this. I think Reaper is the furthest out there, to be honest, because Reaper, although he does get a very strong compounding effect from being close in, no, to
Oh,
be
I'm
honest,
not.
he
I'm
he
not
does
asking
fit
for
in now, not
reworks.
very
I'm
bad.
asking right now, like, because you were going into, hey, angles, your Sigma or your Orisa on an angle getting a window, a damage boost isn't fundamentally different from a DPS getting it, and I'm going, is your Reaper getting a Zarya bubble fundamentally different than your Winston or your Reinhardt getting a Zarya bubble?
No, I'm entirely happy with this.
Oh,
I
okay.
honestly think that I think the Doomfist should have always been a tank. I think that I haven't really thought that hard about Reaper, but I definitely think there's some small changes you could make to May in order to make her non-oppressive. Particularly like if you made her left click a cleaving effect, that would
Mm-hmm.
be absolutely amazing in terms of her having extra resources being poured into her in order to classify her as an initiator in my paradigm. I
Mm-hmm.
think her ice wall obviously couldn't work in that scenario because it
I'm
combines
sorry, I
in.
lost you for just a second. Can you go over that part one more time? Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. I think May's left click would have
Mm-hmm.
to be changed to be a cleaving effect and actually have penetration. I don't think it. I think they removed it at some point,
Sure.
and I think the ice wall also has to go. I think that combines in oppressive ways with other initiating tanks.
I was gonna say that's
I
her
really do.
strongest initiation ability right there. Okay, but you would want
Mhm.
it gone. Okay. Um, and that's like okay, but you're sort of doing this from a design space place, and I think that's an
Yeah.
interesting place to go in terms of reworking those three into tanks, and maybe that makes sense. We've said, hey, these things could be good before, but again, I'm sort of like looking at this from your definition place and going, aren't they already by your definition? Does your definition make sense if we can't place them in there, or should we just say no in their current form? Because you're going, we need to redo these things to make them tanks, and I'm
I
going,
think very small tweaks here. I'm not
okay,
thinking big changes. I'm thinking, you know what, Doomfist's health goes up by 100 or 150, and
mm-hmm,
his ability to insta-kill just goes way down. Okay,
okay,
that's the kind of changes. Literally, number changes onto Doomfist would make him, in my regard, as a initiating tank that would combine in the same way as Bull does with Zarya and Diva.
okay, okay. But like, what about right now? Like, I'm okay making some of these
Mhm.
changes. These are potentially fine. But like, right now, are those three heroes initiator tanks, or are they not? And are they just not because they don't have big enough health
Mhm.
pools? Is that the difference maker?
Yeah, so the bigger the health pool, the more you actually get from having more resources put into you in general, especially in these bursty resources. The smaller your health pool, the more you get from having more long-lasting longevity
I
resources put
I don't
into
know
you.
about that. I mean, would you rather a
Mhm.
Zarya spend your Zarya bubble on your Reinhardt or on your Doomfist?
I definitely think the Doomfist's health pool is already big enough. I just think there needs to be a minimum amount of time spent in before there's a reason to use the resources. I think Doomfist isn't a problem in this regard. I think Doomfist is fine.
Yeah, I think you have me there, dude. I really do think you have me. The health bar size isn't really important. I guess you could say that the takeaway that I was trying to have from that is that people with a small health bar necessarily need less resources in order to keep them in a reasonable range. But I don't know exactly where I was going. Essentially, the only reason why Doomfist, Reaper, and May aren't tanks at the moment is because they're in the DPS category, not the tank category, so you don't have to combine them with Zarya and D.Va. And if they literally just slotted in there and then got buffs to health and other things like that, and the Ice Wall taken away, and Reaper got some kind of cleave or something like that, I genuinely do think these characters would be incredibly well suited to pair with Zarya and D.Va. I think Reaper's the furthest out because he doesn't have any cleaving, piercing effect, but I think the rest of them, May and Reaper, would be very good.
But I guess my point
Yeah,
here
sorry.
becomes if you're going, okay, we
Mhm.
can add May, Reaper, and Doomfist to our initiator tank category,
Sure.
and then you go, okay, we don't really have poke enabling off tank. Okay, then we can also add all of our poke DPS to our poke enabling off tank category.
Mhm.
Yes?
I think the difference there is the fact that these characters donate resources to the DPS and can keep the DPS in an angle, whereas the DPS don't have any resources to donate to either each other or themselves for the most part. Obviously, they have get out abilities. Soldier has keep himself in the angle ability, but for the most part, they don't cross pollinate their resources with other people.
I mean, as long as we're not
It's okay.
considering damage and having different
Yeah,
angles to be resources, which
yeah.
I get. If we go there, it becomes a whole different ballgame. Um, Sombra, May sort of disagree on that. We're not going to use May, obviously. Sombra's really a little less ranged, I think most of us would consider, though her range is workable. She kind of donates resources as a disabler, but okay.
And this is really why I love this conversation. He's actively working with me on my ideas and trying to get me to form them properly. I came into the conversation knowing like basically half as much as I did when I left it.
Personally, yeah.
Go ahead.
The thing is, I think fundamentally starting with this as your design goal, right?
Mhm.
This initiator being a character that gets extra from having resources pumped into them,
Mhm.
the off tank that has a burst of resources to donate to the initiator, and the poke tank having more gradual resources to donate to the wings and basically go wide, and the DPS get good angles with it. And keep them in those angles. I think you can go and very easily make new heroes. Like there's a number of
Okay.
reasons we're going to 5v5.
Sure.
And obviously the player base is the main one, but I think part of it is Blizzard just not wanting to make more tanks. I genuinely
Well, they
think they're
don't know
just
how.
scared
I
out.
mean, they
Yeah,
literally were like, "Oh, Sigma's the main tank, Ball's an off tank," and we're like, "No,
exactly.
you guys
Yeah,
are just wrong." Sorry, go ahead.
I genuinely think that one of the main issues is they don't have this on a whiteboard at Blizzard HQ at all. And the way that they design heroes is
Mhm.
to make cool stuff and put it on a hero
Yeah,
and then release it.
I don't know
Um,
that that's necessarily a problem, to be honest. Like,
it's not a problem in terms of finding interesting stuff, but it's really a problem if you're looking to make a balanced game.
I mean, once they gave us Reinhardt and Winston,
Hmm.
did we need more main tanks? And I'm going to revert to a standard main tank here. Like, we might have liked a third main tank that can poke. You might disagree and say there's no such thing, and that's fine. But once they'd given us the Reinhardt and Winston design space, couldn't they really do whatever they want and the game still works? I mean, we had a
Hmm.
brawl tank, a tank that enabled brawl. We had a dive tank,
Yeah,
and we're able to make poke work in hybrids. Whether poke needed its own tank, I mean, for the longest time, Winston poke was how you played poke, right?
yeah.
Right.
So Winston literally has a pressure cycle that makes space for the
Right.
poke to rotate, get good angles, etc. Yeah.
Right. So
Um,
like do we care? Like it would be cool to have more tanks and such, but does it matter? Is it just a hey, we need to have more tanks in the game? Because you can design cool
mhm,
characters like Hammond, and if Hammond displaces Winston, I don't love it. I feel bad for the ape. But like if he displaces him, it's not the big deal. If you design Sigma, if you do these other heroes, I'm not sure they matter as long as those two are in the game. Like it's not good, I guess, to design heroes that don't get
mhm.
used, but the game still works pretty well. And
Yeah,
that might be
of
hearsay.
course.
That might be everyone. That might be everyone now jumps down my throat. See, I was saying you had the controversial opinion that Orissa's the off tank, and here I am with my
Yeah.
controversial opinion of what do we need new tanks for? You can design tanks, and if they don't get used, it doesn't matter. But like, does it? Does it matter if we don't have these? Like the design of the
Hmm.
game works in terms of how the game needs to fundamentally be able to be played, right? And you
Yeah,
please
it works
shoot me down.
perfectly.
Yeah. Okay.
It just depends on the variance and the plays. Obviously, there's certain categories of these that work well with other certain categories, and there's certain categories that don't. If you don't have enough population in one category, then somebody picking a certain tank can force you onto a role, and you end up with a really bad pigeonholing problem, right?
You end up with a
So,
bad pigeonholing problem if
yeah.
someone. Go ahead.
So if somebody picks D.Va,
Mm-hmm.
let's just clear this and we'll rewrite it. Let's say someone picks D.Va.
Mm-hmm.
Say just put these in small down there so people can see Winston Ball, Reinhardt, and then we're on off tank Zarya Diva,
Mm-hmm.
and then Orisa Sigma Hog. So if
Okay.
somebody picks an off tank Zarya Diva, what are the valid combinations?
I'm sorry, if someone picks, did you say Zarya or
Zarya
Diva?
Diva. Yeah, off
Okay.
tank. In my
Um,
definition, obviously.
Yeah, no, if someone picks it in your definitions, I mean, well, we can pull up our list here and we can
Hmm.
look at this and we can see
Go
all of
for
the
it.
things that are valid with an off tank. And ideally we would like to
Hmm.
submit a initiator since we're using your definitions with our off tank here. So we could get
Yeah,
ourselves
that's what I go for.
Yep.
Or obviously,
Hmm.
Orisa has a combination with Diva that we've
Yep.
seen quite a lot recently. I don't think their resources match up. I honestly think the comp is a bit degenerate. I think it's
I saw
literally
that.
just I think it's just there because Diva and Orisa are just too good. I think they're too good in their current state, or there's something about the characters. If the tank's resources don't gel, but the
Hmm.
comp still works, there's something broken somewhere. And yeah, it was something to do with Lucio
Well,
being
I mean,
banned, something to do with Sigma going.
maybe there's something about, hey, the resources just don't, or the heroes are just too
Mhm.
powerful, or maybe it's a case of other heroes are too powerful. Maybe it's a case of the threat of dive is just so high, and dive is overtuned at the moment. I'm not actually
True.
saying that's the
Yeah,
case, so
100%.
you need to go. But like, I sort of look at that and go, I mean, dive needs like. But I'd also get into, I'm not even sure it's that. I think what you get into is hybrids are just the way to play the game. Like we've discovered that hybrids are
Yeah.
just better than pure
We don't
comps,
we don't
and
commit full to dive because we can have a component of poke in it. We never commit to full poke because we can have a initiation element in it with ball, right?
right. So we're gonna look at these things and go like, no one runs full dive. Even things that it's like Tracer Sombra, that's full dive. I'm sorry, you're running a Brig in your backline. Brig is not a dive hero. We pretend she's
Yeah.
one because you're just going to run her because we hybridize everything. And same thing in poke. We're not gonna run full poke because we want some defense against. We want something to harden us a little bit against dive. We want to have a little bit of a stronger brawl phase, so we mix in a Brig, a Diva, or both. That sort of thing. So like, I
Yeah.
think what you're really getting into here is that's just sort of like I'm not sure that that's necessarily what's going on because any number of things could be going on. Diva is a good hero, and Diva has
Mhm.
been a good hero for most of Overwatch, no question. She's hard to pin
Yeah.
down in terms of
I,
issue.
I I think fundamentally her resource is just too easy to give to multiple different places, and she does a little bit too much damage and has a little bit too much health. There's
That's
a couple of things in her kit.
I think that's true of everyone though. Like you're getting into this
Hmm.
hard donating of resources thing where like Bursty, well, we'll pull up your other screen. We'll pull up your one right here where you sort of go into, hey, ones that can hard donate where we have the big hard donation of the resource, and then we have ones where we've got sort of they're more towards DPS. But like the reason that Diva eventually got replaced, like Diva was just the premier off tank for everything for 90% of Overwatch's history until Sigma came out, and the reason Diva could be replaced is Sigma also had a non-cooldown or basically non-cooldown resource that he could split up the use of. Remember when Diva had the
Yeah.
DM that was like you flick it on and it just stays? And Sigma can use it, and we've had the same issue with every hero that has their resource broken up like that. Tracer was one of the most
Mhm.
powerful early heroes in the game, and the reason for that is one of her abilities is actually split up in three. She doesn't use
Yeah.
all of her blink when she does
They,
that.
the more adaptable the character is, the better they are to time themselves at good places so they can
Right,
actually do things at the same time as the rest of the team.
right.
I think
Okay.
that is part of the reason why we're seeing so much Ball. Just Ball can do more engagements, and then they will get in at the right timing at some point compared to Winston that has a harder but more brittle engagement.
Sure.
Right.
Okay. Again though, sorry. So we
That's
not
okay.
again though.
Sorry.
We zoomed out because it was relevant, but it became
Yeah.
relevant because you were sort of going down this, which I don't remember how we got here, but I remember we were in a place of what goes with the off tanks, the Zarya or
Yeah.
the Diva there.
So
Okay,
if I try and attack this at a different angle, because
please.
maybe that will help you get a little bit more on my side, maybe not.
Sure.
You never know. Right.
Yep.
So if we talk about the way that these comps work compared to these comps,
Mhm.
right? This initiator off tank combination in my paradigm versus the initiator poking tank combinations.
Sure.
Winston doesn't really work here because Bull's strictly better. If he doesn't have extra resources putting into him, would you agree for the most part?
Ball is strictly
Not
better than
strictly, but
Winston, mostly speaking, if we don't put additional resources into him. For in general, or no, you would say, I mean, that's mostly true. I think six-man is the
Mhm.
one thing that may make an argument against that, but you run into this
So
situation of six-man, he is getting a lot of help from his diva.
that's
So, okay,
yeah, that's
yeah,
played
that's
with
fair.
Diva, yeah.
That's fair.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so most of the time I neglect Winston from the initiator poking tank combinations because Winston just is not independent
Oh, for
enough.
poke, yeah, for poke, Ball
Yeah,
does his job better now. I mean, again, he was originally
excellent.
the tank used for it, but Ball does it better when we're talking poke. Yes.
Lovely. So when we're talking about the initiator off tank combinations,
Hmm.
I think these are more committed to the tank solutions than the other combinations. I think these are more committed to the DPS solutions than the angle solutions. Would you agree with that? If I were thinking about maybe Reinhardt Sigma, Reinhardt Rissa, Reinhardt Hog and Bull Rissa Sigma and Hog versus Winston Bull and Ryan with Zarya Diva.
I'm sorry, you lost me. You've got to.
Yeah, no, too many, too
Yeah.
many names. Too many. Would you agree that the combination between the poking characters, Arissa, Sigma, and Hog with an initiator is more likely to look for the DPS angle solutions versus the combinations of the initiators with a Zarya or Diva?
I mean, everything looks for angle solutions.
Mhm.
Even Brawl v Brawl looks for
Sure.
angle solutions. So
Yeah, sure.
I don't
We'll
know.
always have hybridization.
I'm not even sure I consider that hybridization. Like Overwatch is about angles and timing.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
like I'm gonna struggle a little to not concede the point, but to just be like, oh yeah, that point is
engage
fine
with the point.
because
Yeah.
right, like we're literally always looking for angles. The only time we're not looking for angles
Hmm.
is when we need to take part of the way, is when we choose to engage you in a space that your angles can't contribute, and then we're
Hmm.
giving up our own angles because it takes yours away better.
Yeah, sure.
So
I'm happy with that.
no, I'm not. Sorry, I'm
It's
making
okay.
it harder
Don't
to
worry.
get to the point, but okay.
I think in retrospect, I probably went at this from the wrong angle, and we end up on this topic for a little while. But it is really engaging and interesting, so don't turn off. What I should have done is I should have just simply got Temporal to think about the way that the double poking tank combinations combine, and why the double off tank combinations don't work, and the difference between these, and the gradations up to it. Because I really think that's the difference. The poking tanks versus the off tanks, the fact that the off tanks don't combine together, the fact that poking tanks do.
No, we're okay. So I'm thinking about this being a more towards a setting up an angle solution versus this being more towards a tank-based actual. So in this we
Hmm.
have this one here. We have we have Winston Diva. We
Hmm.
have Bull Diva. Uh, if I can type a D when I
I
want
was
it.
gonna say that's an interesting looking D. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we all know Epic Pen what you're trying to
We
type.
do, we do.
and then we have something like Ryan Diva,
Hmm.
right? These combinations, obviously everything's going to be hybridized. We're more likely to have a McCree poking at an interesting angle with all of these than anything else. More
Sure,
likely to have some kind of diving element with these
sure.
two, but we'll always have some sort of poke. And probably some sort of brawl element to keep the backline together. But these are more likely to look for a solution through the Winston Ball or Reinhardt than these ones will look for a solution with the Orisa. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I
Right,
get what you're going.
the Orisa is going to donate the resources to the DPS, which
Hmm.
is then going to find their solution from an angle. And that's really the fundamental difference
What
between these two
what
comps, right?
what resources is Arissa donating to the DPS?
Orisa donating her shield and the ability to have a separate angle or to be able to rotate and keep people in a position.
Is that different than Winston or Ball threatening a different angle to pull attention to them? Like, if a
Mhm.
resource is their shield, that only matters if someone's standing behind their shield. I don't
Yeah.
care if my Ashe is standing behind my shield or not. I'm going to go, hey, Ashe, go get your own angle. Like, especially if I'm running
Yeah.
Orisa plus Sigma, I probably don't have a poke DPS behind each of those
Mhm.
shields. Maybe I have them behind one, but I probably, if I'm running
Yeah.
Echo Ashe, okay, maybe Ashe is using a shield. Echo
There'll
certainly
be a
isn't.
mercy pocket somewhere, right?
Right, right. But I could
Yeah.
also just be like, hey, I'm running Ash Tracer, and I'm perfectly happy to run Ash Tracer with double shield, and only one of those is doing it. So I'm,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, in that case, what I'm talking about, these are more likely to be more hybridized comps,
Hmm.
whereas these are more likely to be specialized towards Dive or Brawl. Okay,
Right, and
so
I.
these,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah,
Okay,
No, you go.
so
You go.
no, like I get that they're that, but again, like I'm still not sure what resource Orisa is donating that's different than attention, because my ball is going to stage behind the team. My Winston is going to stage, stealthy gorilla that sneaks up on an angle. Like these things still pull. Uh, Attention is the resource that we're talking about here, and we've
Yeah.
sort of decided that that's not the case, because if we decide that attention and damage are resources again, the whole, I don't want to say thesis, but the whole thing sort of falls apart in terms of, oh, well, it's investing resources. Well, if attention is a resource, we're back to, I mean, the poke, or maybe this is okay, maybe this fits in. Like, if attention is a resource, the attention that Sigma is an off tank, but Orisa isn't, because Sigma is going and pulling attention to allow the Orisa to advance, or whatever the case may be. It's that off angle that is the threat that allows Orisa to work. And maybe you say that's just fine, but like we have the same thing where the ball, pressuring the team from behind allows your Sigma to advance. So, we sort of get into this like, well, who's what type thing.
I'm entirely happy with you starting with anything being a resource. Obviously, like the resources or the stuff that you actually pull out of the enemy team by doing a pressure cycle into them. It's not only their attention, and I'm happy with attention.
Sure.
It's cooldowns, it's forcing positioning, it's stuff like that.
Sure.
If I was to, so you mentioned the double tank, Orisa Sigma, obviously double shield.
Sure.
There, right? That's a double poke solution that I'm talking about. That's the
Right.
Having two strong angles that enable each other, right? Obviously, one person's going to be close to the middle because objectives exist, and somebody has to touch it eventually. But the idea with these is you spread yourself out as far as possible, and you get as good strong sightlines in an enemy team as possible. You force them to push one of them, right?
Sure.
And that, like, so I changed it from a D to an A here because I really do think they are angular based solutions instead of a DPS enabling solution. Maybe that's better for you. But the idea is that if we were to pair Winston with Zarya, sorry, you're much more likely to be finding a solution for the Winston than if you pair Winston with Sigma. Or if we swap both of them out, maybe we just do Rhine Diva versus Rhine Sigma there. Because Winston's a little bit problematic in that.
You're much more likely to find a solution for your Winston if you. Sorry, you're much more likely to find a solution for your Winston if your Winston has a Zarya than you are if your Winston has a. You went with Sigma there? I mean, Sigma's fine, and the point that you're making with that is, hey, this is relevant because it's not so much going to be about the angles, it's about getting your Winston in with the bubble to do a lot of damage to allow the dive to work. Is that where you're going here?
It's not necessarily that it's nothing about the angles, of course.
Sure.
Like the reason why we do these strong pressure cycles isn't to just kill the enemy team with our initiating tank, right? It's to force resources out of them for a rotation so we can get better positioning, and then we will from there. Most solutions involve a poking angle. But these ones are more likely to have a strong pressure cycle that enables you to rotate, whereas these ones are more likely to have a weaker pressure cycle, and the rotation is going to be enabled by one of these poking tanks with Orisa Sigma, not Hog in this case, because we can talk about Hog later, but may as well ignore him for this time because he does kind of fit there, but not really. Ignore him. Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, they're more likely to have a rotation enabled by, first off, the initiation, but it's going to be weaker, and then the resources that they can give to their team during the rotation or to get a good position.
Okay, so we're sort of getting into the difference between, again, our brawl and our dive here is that poke has a longer threat cycle. I'm not totally sure that's true. I mean, the pressure cycle, right? Like that's sort of the place that you're going here. Poke is a longer pressure cycle. I would say poke wants fights to go. It doesn't really want them to go longer. It's perfectly happy to get 6 headshots in a row and be like, "Hey, we're done, guys." But it tends to be a, "Hey, as the fight's going on, as there's more rotations through the open space, we're happy with that. We don't want you to get on top of us," type thing. Whereas the others don't want a long poke phase, a long rotation phase. They would like the brawl to happen as early as possible. Both poke.
They at least want a punchy brawl phase, right? It doesn't have to resolve the fight. It just has to happen, and then we regen our resources, then we go in again. It's more likely to be more cycly.
So,
I guess.
but I guess how I'd think of our main tanks, and I'm going to use standard terminology, not yours for a second, would sort of
Oh
be
yeah,
like,
go for it.
yeah, we can do that, and we can say that poke has a bit longer of a pressure cycle than say a. We could actually set up a scale. We could go our shortest pressure cycle is going to be dive. Like dive is looking to go, hey, we go in here, we use all of our cooldowns, those combo for just enough damage to force an elimination, and then we find
Hmm.
some way out. We're okay with it. Um, and then we'd go over to Reinhardt and we'd think about our brawl. And this is sort of the issue where you run into of, hey, dive is Winston does a very good job of resting a lot of attention to him very quickly, but
Hmm.
it's a much shorter window than say Reinhardt does in brawl. And Orisa would be a longer one still if we thought of her or like that, where hey, she's got her shield, she can back it up with fortify if she absolutely has to. You know, there's the halt as part of that pressure cycle, and she can ping pong resources with the Sigma who's threatening another angles. Well, not ping pong resources, ping pong attention. If she needs to, great. So we've got that, and like yes, I can see this one lasts longer. But why is it useful to go? Well, this one is too long, so this doesn't make sense. This pressure cycle. But even though brawls is longer than dives, is it just that they're both brawling? Because during a dive, what you're ultimately doing is brawling. Is that like why it's useful to separate these two are initiator tank type styles, whereas this is off tanks. This is these poke sustaining off tanks type thing. Like, why is that useful? And again, I'm gonna keep circling back to this, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't really address what he has here, but he pretty much made a knockdown argument in favor of what I want. But didn't conclude it and expected me to conclude it, I would assume, but then I didn't because I'm stupid. What I should have concluded there is the dive and the broad pressure cycles are necessarily shorter, therefore, they will use the shorter term resources that are more intense to do more. Whereas since the poke pressure cycles are longer and exist on corners and necessarily don't accept those resources, therefore they will use the longer, more gradual resources that can exist over a greater period of time.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
that great?
So the idea is, I think it simply gives us a very clearer picture to look at designing new heroes.
Okay.
I think if we isolate literally the resources they have, ignore the rest of the kit. In terms of resources, obviously some of them easier to isolate. And say these guys pressure cycle and accept resources and do a better pressure cycle the more resources they have. These guys give the resources to the people doing the pressure cycle, and that moves the enemy team to provides more pressure, and then you can rotate and find whatever solution you're planning on, or you can find a solution through killing the enemies with the pressure cycle. And then the poke characters use the pressure cycles from Bull or Reinhardt to rotate to a better position, and then set up their poking angle from there, and are more stable with the DPS in that angle compared to having a Zarya or D.Va standing next to them.
But is it
Um,
is it really different? Because you're saying like during the pressure cycle we use this time to
mhm,
rotate. I mean, during my Orisa, I mean, my Orisa might go, hey, I'm going to fortify and we're going to rotate during this. So we're
mhm,
rotating during a pressure cycle there or during an ability usage there, which they're not quite the same thing, but okay. Or, hey, while my Sigma is pushing someone from the side, that's
mhm,
when my Reinhardt can push. That's when my Orisa can more easily push. And so how is
mhm.
that different than what you just described? Or is it not?
If anyone has lost what he's asked me here or kind of lost the train of the conversation, because I know I did watching this back, essentially what he's asking me is why is the distinction of initiator important, and why does that make a difference between the initiator poking tank combinations and the double poking tank combinations in the way they get through chokes? If both initiators and poking tanks can both have a pressure cycle in the Orisa Shield, Fortify, Grasp, stuff like that, if poking tanks and initiators can both provide enough pressure to allow you to rotate, then what's the point of the distinction between them?
I think specifically talking about Orisa Sigma,
Sure.
these are complementary pressure cycles to each other, and they're defined by the angle the person's on, and
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily where they're pushing. They're designed by where they are on the map in terms of the actual angles they cut off the enemy team. Whereas the Winston Ball and Reinhardt can really pressure in any position of the map, right? With Orisa Sigma, you have this angular-based solution where you go as wide as possible, right? You
Mm-hmm.
completely split your angles. The initiator poking one's going to do a punch on the enemy team and rotate the backline in while it does that into a good spot and hopefully find a solution through that.
Mm-hmm.
And the initiator off tank's going to do a punch that is stronger than the other one.
Okay, so it's just
That,
the strength of their initiation cycle versus an angular solution. But again, I don't really buy that they're all going to use angular solutions, with perhaps
yeah,
with the exception of 6-man.
and everyone will use these pressure cycles, and they obviously have a smaller pressure cycle, although Orisa has quite good initiation. And then the idea is that all of them are going to use it to set up their hybrid solutions. Yeah.
Right. So again, we get into the definitions are useful only for helping in the design space, but the definitions are only useful for helping in the design space if we buy into them. And I don't see a fantastic reason to buy into them because, again, I sort of look at this and go, okay, well, we all solve our problems with angles. We go, okay, Sigma pushes from the angle to help Orisa push in, or hey, maybe we have a Winston soft dives and that allows our core to rotate, and like, wait, those are different roles that we've fulfilled this from. Okay, sort of. So like I'm sort of getting into why is this helpful from a design space, because like I could sort of see it if I could buy into it, but I don't have a good reason to buy into it, and I'm not sure.
This is pretty damn reasonable at this point, just saying, you know what, just give me more evidence. At this point, all I've done is describe what works together, and really, in order to describe why this is good for not only designing new characters, but for educating people on what works and what doesn't work and why, I need to flesh out the rest of what I think about not only the characters that work well together that I've already done, but the characters that don't work well together.
So
I'll describe the other hero combinations that exist
Please.
apart from initiator off tank, initiator poking tank, and poking tank. These are the good ones, right? This is Reinhardt, Bull, and Winston with Zarya or Diva. They do a strong pressure cycle. We're really happy with that. These are like all three of these are just as good. The initiator poking tank, we're really happy with that. Poking. Obviously, there's worse versions of all of these in the combinations. They're not all tip-top amazing.
Sure.
And then we have, further on from that, we have double initiator, right? Winston, Bull, or Reinhardt together. I'd say that this will not be degenerate or be bad design space if we release more characters that accept resources. Okay, so we're talking about their pressure cycles needing more resources in order to go deeper, right, and cleave more. If we release a character that cleaves in that way and wants to go into the enemy team, they will not be degenerate unless their resources cross-pollinate to the other tank. So for instance, cross-pollination would be Winston Bubble and Reinhardt Shield. That's cross-pollination of stopping CC. So that's kind of like...
Well, you say it's not degenerate, but didn't you just say... I mean, I interrupted you. You don't have to be sorry. Didn't you just say... Didn't you just say that you think that's an okay design space? If they don't cross-pollinate in some way, it's a kind of garbage design space, right?
This whole section was a clear example of me just not being ready with the sound bites or the explanations that I needed. I know what I'm trying to say, but all my words get muddled and they come out in random order, and honestly, anyone else listening to this should be confused. What I'm actually trying to communicate and completely failing to here is that though the first three combinations are good and they work well together for reasonable reasons, the second three combinations, these bad or degenerate design spaces, as I completely failed to define immediately, are just characters that in and of themselves should not work in a compatible manner to be better than the alternatives in the first three sections. So what I was defining is that initiator should never be better than initiator off tank unless they're very niche scenarios for it, and it certainly shouldn't be better than initiator off tank by default. If we're talking about off tank poking tank pairings, the second one that I'm going to bring up in a second, they should not be better than initiator poking tank pairings by default. And if we're talking about double off-tank pairings, initiator off-tank should always be better, right? This is these kind of like fundamental that are direct upgrades to this comps that should be better. And if these third free set of compositions start being better than the left free set of compositions, Blizzard probably have just broken something in their design of one of the characters. Either the cross-pollinating resources are too strong and the resources they give to each other are too great, or the rest of their kit is just unbalanced.
Well, you say it's not degenerate, but didn't you just say... I mean, I interrupted you. You don't have to be sorry. Didn't you just say... Didn't you just say that you think that's an okay design space? If they don't cross-pollinate in some way, it's a kind of garbage design space, right?
They can cross-pollinate, but only to a certain degree. If these tanks, the off tanks, are better in terms of supporting these guys to do their initiating cycle, then they are to each other, then we've got a big problem, right?
That's exactly the opposite of what I meant to say.
Because you know what, we just kind of imagine you could just play 2 Reinhardts. I think that would be a fairly reasonable broad comp. I don't think anyone would be playing Zarya with that. I think that shows something about Reinhardt's design. I think that shows that he literally just has too many resources, or these resources cross-pollinate too much with another initiating tank. So when we're making more initiating tanks, what I'd say is you need to be very careful about the way that they stop CC and like act as a health pool for the other person. So that's one way in terms of initiators where it'd be helpful to pin off a design space that you don't want when you're making a character.
And just to be clear, when watching it back, there's no place here where I specifically clearly say that I don't think double initiators should be paired together, or that I think initiator off tanks should strictly be better when paired together. I'm just misspeaking.
Okay. Okay, so I see where you're going. You don't want the
Mhm.
initiators to be better at peeling effectively for. You don't want them to give other resources extremely well to other characters, which is a bit of
It's
an
actually
issue.
another issue. Sorry.
Which is a bit of an issue because the way we think of our main tanks, and I'm using the old term, but the way we think of our main tanks is, hey, those are doing something that is helping the team, well, initiate, and, Rhine Shield being the obvious one there would be, hey, the team can rotate up with this Rhine Shield here. So it's going to be really hard to get to do too much in the initiator space. You can do things like Ball, though people hate Ball on ladder, for example, where they're really not donating resources to it. So do you have any thoughts there? I mean, obviously, again, I don't want to.
It's the hardest of the 3 design spaces to work in, definitely. This is what stumped Blizzard. I think this is the problem, and this is why they don't want to design more tanks, because they've tried it twice. Okay, they tried it with Orisa and Sigma. They tried to make more characters that can fill the main tank slot, but Orisa's had to have so many of her abilities tailored to it that her kit, in my opinion, I think her kit's just kind of broken at this point. The fact is, if you are to make, because they made Orisa in the landscape where they already had Hog with it, but they made Orisa so that she could break Hanamura choke. I think that's essentially the start of it. So we can engage into Hanamura choke and we'll be absolutely fine. We can actually get through it. I think if
the irony, of course, being the real choke on Hanamura's second point, but no one cared about that at that time. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you design Orisa in a way that she can actually break Hanamura choke, she's bad. Okay, she's way too overtuned, and that was a massive problem. I don't think there is a way to design an initiator poke tank in general, because if you simply just move that Orisa player onto defense and have them play from a good position, they're going to have so much more advantage in terms of their resources that you end up with degenerate kind of bunker comp.
This is another example of my thoughts and my clear explanation for things developing over time. What I'd say now, instead of what I just rambled on for like 10-15 seconds saying there, is I say if you give a poking tank enough resources to strongly initiate on a choke, you've already given them enough resources that they are necessarily overtuned when played from the correct position on high ground.
They're going to have so much more advantage in terms of their resources that you end up with degenerate kind of bunker comps.
But that's just a map design issue, because the one thing that you run into is you call them these angle supported, the poke enabling off tanks.
I don't really mind about terminology, by the way. I'm not tied to calling them off tanks or main tanks.
That's fine. So you look at our poke enabling off tanks, and like that's just a design issue that we've mostly fixed. There's a reason we shut out 2 of the 2 CP maps, and it's because their chokes are an absolute pain to get anything through. Like if you also remove Hanamura from the pool, and I don't think you have to. I think Hanamura is borderline, but whatever. I think something like Volskaya, as long as you have 2, maybe 3 ways in, and that's how most of maps are designed, you can't actually lock out an Orisa and a Sigma, or that combination, or an Orisa, and you can give it something else. Like if you want to go Orisa Hog, that's fine. Your Orisa might not get through, but your Hog can, and if your Hog can get through, well, now your Orisa can get through, right?
I think one of the problems that Blizzard has been kind of fighting is that in these really tight chokes that they made, they basically force one of the attacking team to be on either Winston Ball or Reinhardt. They force someone to be able to make enough space that actually can get through. And yeah, of course, it's a map design problem.
Sure.
There's really nothing to say. You can either cut off half the map pool at this point, or you can just
Do you
say, you
really
know
think
what?
you'd need half the map pool?
Mm,
Like, I think about the chokes that are hard enough for that to be a problem, and like, again,
Wait.
Hanamura has a choke like that where you really don't have an alternate route.
Mhm.
Volskaya, I don't think is a problem, and I'm thinking of some of the hardest chokes. I think that truck does enough of a job dividing in its split. Lunar Colony and Paris are already out of the map pool. Like, what are the chokes you think of that double poke tank, even if you went back to the original version of Orisa, not the version of Orisa that can be like, oh, let me just fortify, push it, etc., wouldn't be able to get through? Like, if you took.
I don't think Orisa has a problem now. I think
Right.
Orisa's just been shoehorned in to be able to do
Right,
this,
but I'm
right?
talking original Orisa. Like, you and I were both around, I
Mhm.
believe, when we had our original Orisa that was,
Mhm.
obviously you had the bigger clip, you had the more permanent, we'll call it barrier, that sort of thing. They've changed her to try to make her more mobile with some of the cooldown adjustments, weaker but faster barrier, that sort of thing. That's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah, I think the original Orisa was almost worse in this regard. Like she had just as strong a barrier, so you could walk through
Oh,
places.
okay.
Um, I do think from the outset she was broken. I
Okay.
think that,
Got it.
that having a poking tank that has that many resources to be able to do something like break Hanamo or choke necessarily means that if those resources were used in an actually smart way in order to keep you on a stable angle
Mm-hmm.
and play something like a Risa Hog with split angles like nobody was
Mm-hmm.
really doing back then,
Sure.
I think that would be utterly oppressive. I think
Okay.
people just didn't solve double poke tank back then because Sigma wasn't released.
Right. Okay, so you weren't thinking that, hey, there was ever a version of Orisa that can't do it. You're thinking Orisa was always has been strong enough to break these hard chokes, and
Yeah.
you would like her to be weaker because you say she has too many resources. But is that's not
I'd,
really
I'd like her to be. I'd like to be a poke enabling tank without being shoehorned into the initiator role. Basically, is my idea.
but like, isn't that just the hero creep issue in general? Like we've said, oh, Orisa and Sigma did this wrong, but let's be honest, Hammond is not strictly a more powerful version of Winston, but in a lot of ways, Hammond is a stronger version of Winston. Is that fair? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
okay. We've had the same issue where Anna kind of got released, and whoops, we're in healing creep territory, and now we have BAP, and we're like, wait, you've got this, and then we have Echo, where it's like, okay, for a while, you're kind of just
Yeah.
better
By
at this
Genji.
than right, by Genji, that sort of thing. So we look at this and sort of go, is that really a, hey, it's because this design space thing, or is that just the more general game design problem of you release your heroes to be different, but also to be more powerful because you want them to do more interesting things
Yeah.
because more
There's
interesting things will get people to come to the game. And whoops, we gave, instead of everyone having two abilities and maybe a passive, now everyone has three abilities and maybe a passive.
Yeah. It's not just a power creep thing. It's a feature creep as well, right?
Sure.
It's everything that's getting bigger over time.
Right.
Um, I simply think that Blizzard screwed up with Orisa from the outset. Um, if they kept her in her current state, I guarantee. Well, the answer is, you know what? If we just explain why Double Shield happened, right?
Sure.
Both of the poking tanks had way too many resources. Sigma was absolutely broken in terms of putting his shield out and back in. Nobody even
Only
worked out how
because
to
he
play it
had to
properly
be if he
before
was
it
going
got
to
broken.
compete with Diva. Like, sorry, go ahead.
Mm,
But that's because Diva got a
Yeah,
rework. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Nobody worked out how to play it properly. If you look back at the VODs back then, not
Oh, of
very
course.
many people. They weren't playing any split angles. They were literally just stacked up,
Mhm.
throwing stuff down the choke. They were playing it on blocks. So they couldn't be dove and that
Oh,
sort of
we
thing.
totally
Like,
after Goats came out, everyone forgot how to play angles. Like we originally played
oh
some
yeah,
angles with
100%.
original dive, but then Goats came out into the game and everyone completely forgot how to play angles because Goats went so heavy into objective control rather than map control. Everyone forgot all about angles, and because Goats lasted so long, like everything was gone. If we'd had a double shield composition or something like that back when we were originally playing dive, we might have figured it out because flankers sort of had figured out in our original
Yeah.
dive meta that wait, we challenge for different lanes, this sort of thing, and I'm happy to see it again. But I sorry, I'm
No,
aggressively agreeing
it's all
with you.
good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. One of the big problems I think for Double Shield was that Blizzard just didn't know this was a thing. Right? They didn't know this was a thing. And if we played it properly,
hmm
it would even versus people today with
hmm
our current understanding, if people were playing double poke from back then, today it would be so much more oppressive than it actually ended up there. And it destroyed almost all of ladder for an amazing amount of time back then. It is absolutely ridiculous how these characters got released. And Orisa was half of the problem because they didn't know that you couldn't have an initiator with enough resources to walk through Hanamura choke with a shield. They didn't know that was an issue because they didn't know that this was part of the design space they should have been avoiding, or at least balancing together, right? And really, the thesis is as long
So,
as we look out for double poke combinations,
okay.
initiator poke combinations, and initiator off tank combinations,
Mhm.
and make sure that these are all checked, there's really nothing too bad that we can do to our game. There's
Well,
nothing too bad.
what do you
We
mean
shouldn't
that
be
they're
scared
all
of the design.
checked? Like, should we avoid double poke tank combinations? Like, do we not want those to happen, or do we just not want them strong enough to walk through chokes?
No, they can't be strong enough to walk through chokes.
Okay.
They just can't. Orisa Sigma, can Orisa Sigma get through Hanamura choke on attack now?
Can Orisa Sigma now get through Hanamura?
Yeah,
I mean, they can. They're generally going to want some help. Would sure be nice though. Like if we can get
yeah.
a little bit of challenge through the
They're
window,
gonna hate their
something
life.
like that. Right. They're going to hate their lives, but I'm not totally sure that that's a problem, right? Like it's like, hey,
No,
it's
no, no.
fine.
That's excellent.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like okay, good.
My simple fact is you cannot design these poking tanks to be good enough to do the things that these guys do, the initiating tanks, because if you do, it generates horrible problems down the road.
Okay. I'm
Okay?
not really sure I want to push my Reinhardt through that choke either without a little help from the window, but okay.
You want to be doing something with the window is the answer, yeah.
Yes.
Though we got ourselves sidetracked quite a bit, I think this part of the conversation went pretty well in terms of me explaining what I intended to. I mean, I did it in a pretty circuitous route, but to be honest, we ended up most of the way there in terms of why Orisa can't be able to just walk through a choke. And although we didn't even properly discuss the actual topic, which was double initiator comps, I feel like this part of the conversation set us up pretty well to talk about the double off tank and the off tank poking tank combinations.
Okay.
Okay.
So moving on from this, so the off tank poking tank combinations.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Diva and Diva Orisa.
Mm-hmm.
I think Diva Orisa is just a symptom of these characters being broken. I genuinely think these characters are too good in their current state, and that is why this combination is working. These resources do not match. They should not be played together. The only reason they are being played together is because there's something wrong. What do you think about that?
You think Diva and Orisa shouldn't be played together? Again, I'm not convinced that they're them being played. I mean, is it a sign that something's wrong? I don't know that I necessarily agree with that because I look at that and go, I think you could argue that there's something wrong with Diva specifically in the sense of Diva is very hard to put in a category. Like she's a dive tank,
Yeah.
maybe.
Maybe it's one, maybe it's the other.
Right. Maybe she's a dive tank, but she's always been one of your better poke tank options. But you know what? Winston used to be the poke tank option that we ran before we had a better choice, and so it sort of makes sense that Diva was our poke tank option until we had Sigma for that second role there.
It's interesting to me how Temporal framed these tanks, Winston and Diva, in terms of how they work in compositions with DPS. I mean, calling Winston the poke pick because Winston can make space for the poking DPS solutions to come through. I mean, that entirely makes sense, but we're really talking about this thing here, this initiator poking tank thing there. And saying Diva's a combination between dive and poke, I mean, sure, this is true in terms of what she does with her DPS, but it's not true at all in terms of what she does with her DM, right? And the DM is a completely different resource.
But we just get into a Diva is extremely flexible type thing, and maybe that's the thing. But I don't know, even if we remove the Diva question there, again, we're sort of into the hybrids are just better. I don't want to play a full poke comp without at least slotting a Brig into it, for example. And if I'm not going to slot a Brig into it, maybe I want a Diva. Or if I really expect they're going to do that, maybe I want a Diva and a Brig type thing. And I don't think that's wrong. And you talk about this in your post here, where we can go down to hybrids. And I don't think that's wrong. Hybrids are just a better way to play the game in large. So I don't necessarily go, hey, that's degenerate, except that you're saying, no, our tanks really need to be lined up. And I'm like, why do our tanks need to be lined up if our DPS and our supports don't need to be?
Another interesting point here that me and Temporal have yet to disagree on is this categorization as Brig as a brawl character. She's not a brawl character. She is an enabler of the DPS to stand where they want to stand. I mean, you can say she's a brawl character because she enables them to stand in these places by brawling,
But really, what Brig does is zone off space to allow people to stand in good places and donate her healing really wide so that multiple angles are enabled. And that's really how I think about the angle or poke enabling healers. So I'm definitely sure we'll disagree about this at some point, but definitely I thought I'd leave it for this conversation because we've already got enough.
I think if our tanks' resources don't gel together,
Okay.
and they are still good enough to be played together. If fundamentally the resources just don't match, right? We have this 2-second DM that wants to be used for a pressure cycle or do peeling, like really strong peeling in the backline for a dive. And then we have a shield that lasts for a very long time and opens an angle and that sort of stuff and doesn't want the DM used on it. If that works, one of these characters
I don't know
needs
that Diva's
to
ever wanted to do that, though. I don't know that Diva's ever wanted to spend all of her DM to enable Reinhardt to swing, for example,
No,
to
of course
enable
not.
Winston to cleave. Like, what's made her so good is it's dividable. Okay, then you say,
Yeah.
of course not, but it sounds like you were saying that you were looking for, hey, we can donate our resource. Diva doesn't really
Yeah,
want to donate
I'm
a
looking.
resource. She wants to withhold it. Go ahead.
Now, I don't think this is true at all. Diva doesn't want to withhold a resource. She wants to spend it as aggressively as she can to force answers out the enemy team by providing a deeper or better pressure cycle. I really do think this is fundamental to the character, that you want to be paired with someone that allows you to pressure well. And this goes a lot further down into my conversations about questions and answers, how you always want to question the enemy team early, so they have to use more resources than is necessary to answer it, otherwise things will break. And then when they question you back, they won't have those resources to throw into that question to actually challenge you. I was trying to avoid a conversation about this right now because I feel like it would have ran on quite a while. So what I did was essentially re-explain my point with more context in a way that he might agree with. And I think he bit, if I recall correctly.
Sure, yeah. I'm looking to donate the resource very specifically at the point of engagement, right? I'm looking
Okay.
to stop the Winston having to bubble early. I'm looking to stop the Ryan having to shield up for the flash sleep, nade, discord, etc. kind of stuff. You are donating resources on Diva to your Winston. If you're not
Sure.
doing that when he's engaging, you're kind of screwing up there, right?
Okay.
So this is a direct thing that you want to do, and if you don't get to do that,
Mhm.
instead, you can only really use your resource for the kind of like palliative sections or pushing out angles kind of thing. You
Mhm.
can't use it for something aggressive. And obviously, setting up solutions faster into the enemy team is obviously always going to be better
Sure.
than waiting for the enemy team to set up their solutions onto you.
Right. Okay.
I'm not sure we necessarily disagree.
Oh, we probably don't, but I'm gonna poke at things because it's my job here.
No, that's absolutely fine.
um.
Enjoying
Okay.
it.
Okay. So what about Diva Ball then? I mean, Ball really doesn't need Diva's help for the engages, right? Like, and is that a problem that we designed Ball wrong?
Not really. I
Okay.
think Bull and Winston are very comparable. I think as I said, I said it in my video, I'm pretty sure. Bull is this really soft, flexible hero
Mhm.
that does weaker pressure cycles, and I would call
Mhm.
Bull's pressure cycles weaker,
Yeah.
but at a bonus of being more independent, getting more engages per unit of time without a certain amount of support,
I mean,
right? So,
Diva really doesn't rotate resources that well to Ball, period, though. Like, it can
yeah.
be kind of cool to DM a pile drive, but not really, because the timing rarely works out. So,
Mhm,
and after that, Ball's power is such that DM doesn't really
mhm.
cover Ball well, and tends to be better used on generic stuff, not on, hey, I'm helping my Ball. It tends to be better donated to the core. She, at that point, starts becoming, and maybe this is
Uh,
your issue, more of that poke enabling off tank there. So, like,
Diva have a lot of Swiss Army knife, right, with her DM.
right.
It is literally an all-purpose situation, like stopping thing. It is absolutely amazing. I think if maybe we just put a bigger cooldown on DM, we see DM start being used more aggressively or being kept fully for the
Yeah,
backline
we
stuff and
could,
waiting for
but
the enemy
the
to
problem
connect
is
with
then
us.
we just see Sigma hard replace her, like we saw
Yeah, of course.
Diva hard replace Sigma when we had the original Ball
Hmm.
Sigma comp, because I mean
Yeah.
those two heroes are competing for that. But anyway, you get it.
Yeah,
Okay.
in my opinion, these two comps are relatively comparable in how they work.
Hmm.
And I think that's why it's so.
So I entirely agree here. Bull does not get resources from Diva or Zarya in a way that
properly enables his pressure cycles. It does make them safer. It enables him to go deeper and slam exactly where he wants to and swing through groups that he otherwise wouldn't be able to. But most of the time, you don't want to be doing this, which should mean Bull has a much stronger link to the poke enabling off tank. Bull should be better with Sigma, Hog, and Orisa than he is with D.Va Zarya. It doesn't mean he's strictly bad with them because he does get more from the pressure cycle, but it does mean he has a weaker link in this regard. And this is the kind of thing where, you know what, if we make it so that the initiators have a gradation, we have Reinhardt and Winston up here, and we have Bull down here. The ones that cleave more and get more from the extra off-tank resources are going to be better with them, and the ones that get more or just simply get less from the off-tank resources are going to be better with the poke enabling tanks, and it's going to be a spectrum between these two. I don't think either of this means that my design space is broken, because I'm not describing an initiator off-tank as strictly better than initiator poking tank. What I'm describing is the different types of ways these characters can combine, not specifically the initiator off-tank is better or worse. I think this is actually one of the biggest ways that I failed in this conversation not explaining this section. And I kind of just pivot onto the next topic of poking tank and off tanks being different instead of fully explaining the difference here. I honestly, yeah, let's just put it down again to me just being a little bit too scatterbrained. But I think I could have done more justice to my ideas.
I think that's why you're so easily able to push back against it, because they work in almost the same way. But simply put, these characters do not combine together because their resources don't gel. There's no way that you, and we'll go on to the last one. Might as well put it on the screen while we're here. Off tank, Zarya D.Va. These resources do not gel in any way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah. No. Please kill me now. Is basically what those say. Yeah.
So it's a 2-second bubble with no initiation. Is a DM with no angular support. Right. It's this kind of thing where it does nothing of anything.
And it's not that it's a DM. Sorry, one more time with that last part. It's a DM with no angular support.
I think I misspoke there, to be honest.
I was going to say that doesn't.
My brain, I was thinking something silly as I said it.
Okay. Like I mean so what's the issue that those two run into if you can re-articulate that, because that didn't quite fit.
Yeah. So the thing with Zarya D.Va, yeah, it's a DM with no initiation. And it's a bubble with no initiation, right? There's nothing that you're getting from having a burst of really good resources. D.Va's still good because she can do literally anything.
D.Va things, yeah.
Sure, if you have this comp or this comp, these two comps here, right? The off-tank poking tank and off-tank, you're always going, like the off-tank resources, they're going to peel, okay, for the most part.
Right.
They're never going to be used aggressively. They're never going to be... And I think these characters necessarily get more from using their abilities aggressively, these off-tanks. I don't think they should be kept for peel. And I think if we end up in a situation where these characters are played, but they're only played for peel, for the backline, and they don't care about having a pressure cycle into the enemy team, they're probably just too good.
I do think I did pretty well with that explanation there. I think that's pretty concise and pretty good.
So we're going back to D.Va is just too good, because I'd argue that when D.Va is paired with a ball, that's a lot of what she's doing. I mean, yes, she'll still commit to some dives, but okay.
I think Bull is slightly out of this. Obviously, his pressure cycles don't get enabled by extra resources anywhere near as much as Winston or Reinhardt.
Sure.
But it does enable him to go deeper and do more in the angle.
I mean, I don't know. Like, he's fine with a Zarya bubble. That creates issues with your comp, but Ball does get some pretty solid value out of the bubbled pile drives.
Yeah, and then the idea is if we do a bubble pile drive, we can pile drive in the place we want instead of the place we're kind of forced into by their amount of pressure, right? So he's still getting stuff, but the stuff he's getting isn't direct cleaving damage. It's, you know what, I can just be more greedy with my pile drives and do whatever the hell I want in the enemy backline. And he doesn't pair with D.Va quite as well, because D.Va has to be near him for the engagement.
Right.
So D.Va ends up doing some more away stuff. So that is a freckle. Yeah. Of course.
Sure. Freckle, so I like it. Okay.
This is all of the comps, right? This is everything that exists in the game. I think if you check these to not be degenerate, check these to not be degenerate, check these so that the resources don't
Can
donate
we?
to each other.
So I've got the cross-pollinate thing, but when you say
Mhm.
don't be degenerate, do you just mean I don't want a hero like Diva to be too overpowered, or can you give us a little more definitionally there?
And this is why you have a conversation with Temporal. When you don't explain yourself properly, he's smart enough to realize you haven't explained yourself properly and that you probably have more stuff to say and brings you back to it so you don't look like an idiot.
When you say
Mhm.
don't be degenerate, do you just mean I don't want a hero like Diva to be too overpowered, or can you give us a little more definitionally there?
I mean, either exist in bad design space, which is like
Still too
anything that.
subjective. Sorry, go
Yeah, yeah,
ahead.
yeah. I'll define it. So, it exists in bad design space, which is any kind of ability or character that just exists that just makes the game worse by being there. I'm thinking something like how Blizzard experimented a load with extra health, right? Extra health pools and that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. I think as long as I just don't think these comps are things that should be good in the game in general. I think you've got a really big problem if these are good. These three here, they can be okay. There's nothing wrong with running your Ryan Winston. I don't really mind about that. But as long as there's something strictly better to do than run this, such as running Ryan Diva, such as running Winston Diva, then we're okay. If these two get better than Ryan Diva and Winston Diva, we've got a really big problem on our hands. And that's what you check for the design space, in my opinion.
I could have gave a more accurate description of design space here. I explained that it's a total area in which you could design characters and abilities, but then I could have gone into a couple more examples other than simply just overshields. I could have gone into the fact that putting too many localized resources like shields leads to clumping, and that's a poor design space. I could have gone into the fact that Diva's DM is too easily applicable to multiple situations, and therefore that's probably bad design space. In general, what we're looking at is horrific power creep or things that make the game unfun to play in either a specific character scenario or a combination scenario. That would be design space. Spaces where you're not able to put these things into the game because they make the play worse.
Okay, so let me just make sure I've got these. So
Mhm.
you've got initiator. You don't want cross pollination so strong that they can just protect each other, because then they become both engines and fuel, and you don't want
Yeah,
that. Um, okay, that's fair.
you're an analogy machine.
Well, I try. I mean, it sort of fits. Then we've got our off tank plus poke, and we don't like when off tank plus poke is powerful. And when I say off tank here, I mean strictly Diva Zarya. So Diva Zarya plus one of our heavy poke tanks. We don't like when those are powerful. Diva Zarya plus one of our poke tanks. Again, I'm not really bothered necessarily by the Orisa Diva. I think it is a product of, yes, Diva's probably too powerful, but like I guess that's just my biases of how I'm looking at it type thing. But I
Yeah,
see where you're
it's not.
saying if it gets us very close to, hey, we don't want to run Hog Zarya together. That was terrible. We don't want to run
And only
Orisa
existed because
Zarya
Priority
together.
Passes came out.
Yeah, right, right. Okay, go
What
ahead.
I'm saying here is that Orisa Hog and Orisa Sigma and Hog Sigma should
Mhm.
always be better than any of them compared with Zarya or Diva. I think that the resources that they have are so much better in terms of the poking angle that if the Zarya and Diva combinations with them get better than the combination between the category there,
Mhm.
then we've got a problem. In terms of Hog, he's got resources, he donates it to himself. Which is a DPS angle, so I guess you could say he donates
I mean,
resource
he
to a
is a
poking angle.
resource. He stuns and repositions the enemy. That's quite helpful to the DPS friends that are with him.
Yeah, of
But
course, but
okay,
he doesn't cross pollinate resources into other people. Obviously, if we're talking about doing stuff to the enemy, there's a lot more depth here.
sure, sure. Okay. Um,
And yeah, sure, like bringing in the way that characters' aggressive abilities control space and therefore enable DPS angles is really important. I mean, DM is a great cross pollinating, poke enabling off tank ability, right? It's great at enabling people to stand in good places because you can put DPS out of the angles, allowing people to move into those spaces. And I think a lot more context should be given there.
I mean, again, I'm not really sure that Orisa is donating resources to other people either, is the thing. Like, I'm not, again, because I just don't care if anyone is standing by an Orisa shield. I simply don't. So, like, I'm not totally sure
Mhm.
that I buy that Hog is meaningfully different there. Like, yes,
But
she
if we,
sets. Go ahead.
sure, yeah, but if we look at any of the other characters, Winston, Bull, Reinhardt, Zarya, and Diva, if we compare them on the same angle that Orisa would be,
Mhm.
they are doing so much less angular work for the most part. And Orisa can really keep an angle open and keep it threatening in a way in order to set up a two-factored solution.
Mhm.
Whereas obviously there's some elements in which every single character does
But Hog's
more or less
doing
the
that
same thing.
too. I mean, Hog's not holding it
Yeah.
open because he's more bursty with his hook threat than they are. So I guess you could compare it to being more like a Winston initiation, where it's like more powerful but can't sustain type thing. But I don't really know about that because it's not like Sigma, for example. Well, okay, Sigma and Orisa do both hold the angle open longer than Hog. But is that like, does that just make Hog more the initiator? No, I guess not, because you can't really make him better with resources. Okay.
I
Okay.
personally think we can rework Hog really easily. I think, you know what, we just move Hog up here into the off-tank category
Mhm.
and make it so that he can chuck his canister at initiating tank
Mhm.
and do a certain amount of healing and 50% damage reduction. I genuinely think that would move him solidly up into this category, and that would be a really consistent way to have the game.
I mean,
I think him not.
so he can't use it on himself then, right? Like it has to be used on other players because
Yeah,
otherwise you
or
just
we
made
could
him
say, you know what?
terrifying.
Yeah, we could say, you know what, he can technically do both, but it's at a reduced capacity. We can balance it however we want.
Okay.
But the idea is, if we're designing characters like this, all
Mhm.
we have to do is come up with an ability that can be donated to an initiator, and then everything else, as long as that ability isn't broken,
Mhm.
everything else can be designed later or balanced later.
So
If we,
really
sorry,
like the design space that you're trying to get into, like I mean, I'm just trying to sort of reframe this again. You really just
yeah,
want your
yeah,
design space framed in such a way, and I'm gonna sort of re-explain it back to you, and I've got it, but like I want you to be like, yes, you've got it, or no, you don't like my resummary here. Is
yeah, sure.
you want to have your category of tanks that can have resources donated to them and do a lot of good stuff with those resources donated to them. You want to have your category
Mhm.
of tanks that can donate resources to other tanks, and then you
Yeah.
want a category of tanks that are different, but really you've decided to make your category of tanks that are different be, hey, these should be where all the poke tanks live. Is that a fair way of putting your three categories?
I agree here, but I wasn't entirely comfortable when I did. Um, I wasn't entirely sure why I didn't agree at the time, so that's why I didn't disagree. So he defined it as the initiators accept resources, the off tanks give resources. Okay, he's comfy with that. Wonderful. The third kind of like interesting thing you can do in the game of Overwatch should be to do with DPS, right? If you're not accepting resources, you're not giving resources to the resource acceptors, then the third thing should be giving resources to angles and DPS in those angles. Um, I think what he meant there is that I think that Deep Blizzard should work characters into these zones, but I feel like if you don't have a character that is doing any one of these three things, all you're doing is creating a fat DPS, right? You're literally creating just a boring character at that point, in my opinion. Tank should be either initiator, off tank, or giving the DPS angles wide. I guess I am agreeing with him completely. Now that I think about it, yeah, maybe.
Uh, yeah. I have one extra thing to add on top of that,
Please,
and
please.
that's as I did in my video,
Mhm.
the difference between resources that can be donated either way, right? So you have a resource from here,
Mhm.
2 second burst, okay?
Sure.
You have a resource from here that's maybe 6 seconds of holding an angle open. You can donate these to an initiator, right? You can
Poorly.
push a
Yeah.
Sigma shield in front of a
Yep.
Reinhardt. It does work. It's not the best use of his stuff. You'd rather use it somewhere different. And these guys can be donated to the DPS, right? But we're not looking to do this to start with in our comp. We're not building our comps around pushing a Zarya bubble towards DPS. We're building our comps around pushing the Zarya bubble towards the initiator and pushing the poke tank resources towards the
Again, Doomfist might disagree, but we had that discussion. Okay.
yeah. So if we think about this, the resources are similar and the
Mhm.
resources can be compared. But if we just say, you know what, there's a spectrum, right? These are the burst on the top, and
Mhm.
these are non-burst. We call it non-burst
Right.
because we can, you know, there's
I'll
loads of different
pull up your image.
resources.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can go burst and non-burst there,
Mhm.
and if we generate a more bursty character, they're more likely to combine with initiators
Mm-hmm.
and we make a non-bursty character, they're less likely to combine with initiators and more likely to combine with a poke sense. But importantly, the non-bursty characters combine with themselves. Okay,
Sure.
whereas the bursty characters don't combine with themselves. Okay, because if you combine two bursty resources like Zarya and Diva, that's off tank, then you end up with resources that just don't gel together. But the poking angular support resources, they basically they work additively. Like they stack up, and once you have enough angle control and ability to keep people at an angle, you really can do some stuff.
What do you think we're
The,
more? Oh God.
no, no, no. Go ahead.
What do you think we're more in need of? More of these off tanks that can donate resources, more of these initiation tanks, or more of these poke things? Again, I'm talking in an Overwatch 1 sense. In Overwatch 2, that completely changes the resources. But what do you think we're most in need of? Do you feel like we need more things like Zarya and Diva, or do you feel like, because that seems like probably the bigger design space, or do you feel we need more stuff in the poke area there?
Well, thank you for asking, Temple.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Okay, okay, yeah. That is exactly what I'm aiming at
Right.
in future, right? I'm able to spell this out, and I'm able to say, bursty resources, long-term resources, and then acceptors or cleavers or stuff
Sure.
that takes a resource and does extra stuff with them. So in terms of these, this is the easiest section to add to. This is so ridiculously easy to add to. Like, what resources do you think you can give to a initiator tank like Winston in order to make him do his pressure cycle better?
I mean, you can give him, obviously the things that exist are things that either cause him to not take damage. There would be things that cause him to take reduced damage.
Hmm.
There would be things that make him move faster. There would be things
Yeah,
like that make him do more damage. There would be things that shorten his
excellent.
cooldowns. Like all of these could be
Perfect.
things that might make sense.
Wonderful. And we want these to be bursty, right? If we want them to combine not with each other, we
Sure.
want them to combine with the initiators instead. So,
Sure.
like, I just have a list like healing, damage reduction, purges, blocks, over shields, like bursty over shields, speed, damage boost, and the knockback cancellations, right?
Sure.
All of these kind of stuff. There's loads of design space here. Real quick, the design space that Hog's taken up here, that is healing and damage reduction. Right, so
Right.
so we've made a new off tank that donates resources to the initiating tanks just by just saying, you know what, we'll pick two of these things, combine them, and then we've got a new hero. And it's so easy to make the character around this. Like, you don't need to have anything specific in terms of the off tanks. I feel like the Poke tanks have to have a little bit more specific kit in other regards. In terms of, I think they should have a weapon that can jiggle peek. I don't like Orissa's gun.
Yeah.
But that's by the by, right? You can pretty much design any character on this as long as the Hog can donate resources to the initiators. I'm happy, right?
Sure.
What is next? The poke tanks. We need them to have resources that keep DPS in the angle. How do we do that? What resources do DPS want?
I mean, DPSs want. DPS are going to want things to protect them. They're going to want things to give them scouting information, like widow sites, like
Ooh,
Sombras,
can
things
have
that
that
give
one.
them
Yeah, pretty good.
information. They're going to want things that pull attention away from them. Again, that sort of thing. Like those are some of the. Obviously they'd like more damage. Those are sort of the things, and then they like things like Harmony Orb to help them sustain. So healing. So those are sort of the obvious things that come up there, where you could have if Sigma, for example, had Soldier's Healing Station. Hey, that would be pretty cool for DP. I'm not actually going there, but yeah.
I'd be happy with that, quite frankly.
Okay.
Poking tank with healing, poking
Sure.
tank with Harmony Orb, I'd be more than on board for. Like, that would be absolutely amazing to me. I'd really enjoy poking tank with Harmony Orb.
Okay.
There's loads of resources there. There's loads of different stuff. What we're talking about is longer term stuff, right?
Right.
It's not these burst of resources. It's, you know what, we're going to give you a 50% damage boost for 10 seconds. Right,
Okay.
or 8 seconds, right?
Sure.
It's not, I'm going to give you 30% damage boost for 2 seconds. And that would be amazing to give to a Winston, whereas the longer one, sure, you probably still give it to your Winston had I made it then, because I said the wrong number. Probably should have said like 10. But still, like, it goes to the angles, right? Because
there is a topic here that I don't think I was ready to face, and it's the fact that initiators and DPS in strong poking angles can both accept strong bursty resources. But for the most part, you don't want DPS to be fighting or holding a poking angle unless they're going to get a lot of work done with it with a strong bursty resource. For instance, this 2 second, like, take a breather effect on a Cassidy and a poking angle you much rather have a harmony on them, unless you think that that angle is going to generate a solution in about 2 seconds. I mean, it really is matching the resource intensity and length to the amount of time the character really needs to generate a solution. So it's easy for Temporal here to have a problem with this if he wanted to. And he did have a problem with this earlier, but he didn't feel the need to call me out this time on it. And I'm glad he didn't, because it let the conversation continue. But he could have if he wanted to, and I don't think I really would have been able to respond properly. There is also an additional effect that I didn't discuss here, which I should have, but I kind of only worked out that it was necessary afterwards, in that the main design area you have to specify with the poking tanks is that as long as you have a poking resource that can't be given to the initiator, you're okay. For instance, amp windows and stationary effects have a really difficult time of initiators using them. Whereas strictly like use this on a target effect, you can put that on anyone you want. Initiators act in certain areas by definition. They want to initiate into a space. So having it hard to apply, for instance, we could do a 50% damage boost to a space, and still initiators, if you couldn't apply it to the space they wanted to go into, they couldn't use it.
It's less of an effect and it's a longer effect.
I get what you're saying.
In terms of that's the resources. I think the poking tanks need a specific kit. I don't like the fact that Orisa has to stare at an angle in order to do damage. I'd rather her be able to jiggle peek. Can we just give Orisa like Bastion's gun from the new one, like the pellet one that just like fires every now and again?
I mean, we could, but I think what they're trying to do is they want different aim styles to be in a certain thing, and they're like, hey, how can we get tracking of a sort? Anyway.
Yeah, I'm more or less jesting here.
Sure.
And then the initiators, you know what? That's the hardest design space to build in. But I say Doomfist is pretty close, pretty damn close. Why don't how do we not make them degenerate or bad and work together? Well, we stop the resources pollinating, but also we make their engagements hard to time together. Okay, so it's also something about timing engagements. And how would you do that? Maybe a character with knockback, like straight knockback. How would you combine that with Reinhardt? You probably wouldn't. It would be quite difficult because Reinhardt wants to actually hit things. Okay,
well,
so that's
you combine it. Angles are the answer. If you hit people with a Doomfist from one direction and it knocks them back into your Winston that was set up to cleave them back there, he's perfectly happy with it. But okay.
Well, if I set up an immobile tank that could knock people back, that's not going to combine in a really degenerate way with Reinhardt for the most part.
Sure.
Okay, because like we can push him off a corner, that's good, strong initiation, but Reinhardt's not going to combine with it and start swinging on people for the most part. And I'd be happy with that kind of stuff. There is design space here for all three of these. I'm really, really like solidly Blizzard. You can make heroes. It's gonna be okay. All you have to do is make sure that these guys and these guys together and these guys together don't break the game, and then you're okay. I think that's basically where I'm getting to.
Okay. Can you go a little more on initiators? Because you again were like, okay, how do we make them not cross-pollinate? How do we strengthen them? And one idea would be knockbacks there. What else there? Because I think that probably, you're right, is the hardest, and that's where I would go, let's tickle our brain. And maybe that's why I went, hey, did we ever need more than 3 main tanks, or a main tank for each style?
Yeah, so it's all about making these two better to pair with them. If you want to do a really strong initiator solution to a fight, then making them pair together. So this is all about making them better. How does Winston Ball not work?
How does Winston Ball not work? I mean, it works okay in terms of its strength. It struggles in terms of its sustain there. It's not a terrible combination, but it tends to be, we're going to hit hard, we're going to dive really, really hard. Then you run into some of the issues of, okay, in future fights, you're sure going to want that DM as an answer to some of the ults that are start going to come online, and you also run into a little bit of sustain issues. But okay.
Yeah, so the way Winston Ball works is that they literally it's not only that, there's one extra thing, and that's the initiations are kind of hard to match up unless you're organized, right? The ball has to kind of be ready, and then the Winston go in at the same time as the ball. It's these initiation timings as well. And I do think I think Ball is an excellently designed character. I think Blizzard did really well with it, because it's the type of thing that it's the same of a thing that you already have, but doesn't combine with somebody else in a really degenerate way or make this really good. I think they did amazingly with Ball's design in that regard. So we think about just you know just desync the times. So desync. Sorry, I'm not very good at drawing. Desync
But that only
engagements.
matters it doesn't only matter, but that makes it
Mhm.
harder to hit some of the synchronizations. But
Yeah,
like we can get
at high
GM
levels.
players
Yeah.
to synchronize Winston and ball dives. Like they
Mhm.
do. Like that's not something that they necessarily struggle with. So like is that
Sure.
just a okay, this is going to affect the majority of the player base? Sure, but
Yeah,
I
I'd
mean,
argue that Blizzard doesn't really care.
okay.
I'd argue that Blizzard is probably okay making something like this that'll probably be pretty good. Maybe not the best, but pretty
Hmm.
good in like really high level play if they can get their engagement timed. But
Okay.
as long as that doesn't translate to ladder and people start complaining about it, I think Blizzard would probably make it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think 'cause I also don't think it would be like that painful of a comp that people would hate in the pro scene either. I think you have a little bit of a problem of
Mhm.
okay, now we're going to have everyone trying to mirror the pros and it doesn't work, but we've avoided that before. Okay.
And yeah, and you only need to make it just about as good or a little bit
Right.
worse than the off tank one, and you're probably going to be all right.
Hmm.
You don't need to make it like trash. You just like it can have some synergy and it can work. It just needs to be worse, right?
Okay.
So if you think about the other way, the resource cross pollinating. Obviously, Winston has the shield, which does cross pollinate with the bull
Yeah.
because he gets less CC. And
Hmm.
any two things happening to the enemy team at once is going to create less CC onto the other one.
Sure.
I really think the design space here for dive, I think Doofus fits into this, and it doesn't make a bad
Yeah, Doomfist is fine.
comp that works well together.
Yeah.
I think this would work in terms of a two tank combination.
Hmm.
Maybe increase Doofus health a little bit, maybe reduce his lethality.
Okay.
Just make him so that he can't insta kill people on the engagement. Probably be nice, otherwise people would be complaining all the time.
Okay.
But I don't think that this and this is something you'd actually pair up. I still think you go with Doomfist with D.Va in that situation, or Winston, or Bull. And I've been picking on D.Va quite a bit because we really don't have that many examples of as a off tank that enables an engagement, right? We don't
Sure.
have that many examples.
Sure.
Um, and if you had that hog up there in the off tank category,
Right.
I think
Damage reduction.
you
Sure.
pick the hog with them as well. That'd be
Okay.
really interesting.
No, I see it.
So
I worry a little bit that it's hard to fill that initiator design space and not
mhm,
have them help each other too much without
yeah,
getting really, really knockback heavy, which is a design that we've already tried to move away from
sure.
in Overwatch. Because, like, again, if you're going to have something not synchronized with Reinhardt as a brawler, it probably does need to knock them back. I think you're probably right there because
Yeah.
the other option is you give them some sort of
Can't have
that's
it knock them in, right?
right, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'd have a little bit of concern there. But I see how it's helpful as a way to think about it to design new heroes. I mean, I'm not going to go adjusting my terminology. I can tell you that much at it.
That's absolutely fine. Don't worry about that.
But like, I do
This is
see how
literally
it's
just a
right. No, it's a thought experiment, and it's always
yeah.
useful. Just like it can be useful to go, okay, let's think of Overwatch heroes in terms of poke, dive, or brawl heroes. Now let's change how we're looking at them and think of them in terms of close range and short range heroes and
Mhm.
mobile and immobile heroes, where it can help you see some different things. And I do see that. I mean, it does do a good job thinking about these poke enabling off tanks like this in terms of no, you really don't want them to be able to donate bursty resources, and you really don't want to give them bursty resources unless till you get to the brawl phase anyways, and it's sort of you'd have preferred to solve the fight faster than that.
Yeah, and then we're like, okay, I guess we're in the brawl phase. We'll do whatever.
Yeah.
How long do you have? Do you want to talk about 5v5 for a bit?
Sure, I can talk
'Cause
5v5 for a bit.
that's essentially all of my my
So
thesis
before we
on
go
tank
5v5,
design space.
do we want to jump through here and see? I'm not going to obviously like catch up on chat. That would be
Yeah, go for
monstrous
it.
at this point. But I look at that and go, I can pick through maybe if people have any questions at this point. I know I've mostly ignored you, chat, where you're like, hey, you strongly disagree or still have a huge question on something like this. Throw that up now. I'll give you guys just sort of a minute or two to get that up there. I can't go through everything that you guys already wrote, but if you guys want to poke
Beautiful.
what's that?
Yeah, nobody disagrees with me in my chat, so I need you guys
Well
to tell
played.
me I'm wrong.
Well
I need you guys to tell
played
me I'm
there.
wrong.
So if anyone is like, hey, wait, I really don't think this was addressed because, before we move on to this new topic, I'd sort of like to give people a chance to address that. I mean, I can jump through and maybe just pick out one to give them time to get in there. Here's a different definition of main tank: the member of the team that creates the main distraction of attack relative to which other members can create off angles. I mean, Yeah, there's something to that.
I'm happy with that. It's literally Orisa being paired back here is just to do with the way that she doesn't accept resources from Zarya and Diva in the same way that the others do.
Right, but that could change again if we went, hey, the resource that we give is we give a resource that is the damage
You,
boost. Like again,
yeah, you said about the
yeah.
AoE damage shots. I didn't really have an answer for that at the time, to be honest. I haven't really thought about being able to do an AoE effect
Mm-hmm.
to a poking tank. That's really interesting to me. And I guess I guess that would be really good design space. Yeah, I'd be happy with that. But I do think if it was an AoE effect, it would obviously like no, not everyone has bullets, so
Sure.
there's some thought there.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Obviously, after this conversation, I found a way to react to that, which is essentially if Orisa was given bullets that exploded on impact, the bullets exploding would only be as good as the place she's standing. And it would allow Orisa to accept resources when she's brawling, but still, given her range and the rest of her resources, she wouldn't necessarily want to brawl, right? It would be this kind of thing where you maybe you set them up together and you play them together, but then we go poke, 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 and then when belatedly we end up in the brawl phase, we give this resource to Orisa, allowing her to cleave into the enemy team. That would be a way to make the character temporarily an initiator. That'd be very interesting in terms of design space, but obviously I wasn't ready at this point in order to have a talk about it. I know I've said that a lot now, but now that I've actually released my design space video and my actual designing tanks video, I think we're more or less at the stage where I'm comfortable talking about anything in this context that I know of.
Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to break your design. I mean,
No, fair enough. That's the job.
to add to the point, I think that one of the things that differentiates Orisa from others is Fortify is usually better staggered from other resources than stacked. Yeah, that's the point about extending it. That's fair. That's a good one. Lucio is empty. No. Does pressure relief versus pressure creation help this definition? What do you think there?
Pressure relief versus pressure creation, as in these two together when we do the initiating cycle and the pressure cycle create pressure, and then if we use it on our backline, it relieves the pressure. Right?
Yeah.
That really what we're thinking about?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but we wouldn't want to relieve the pressure. We want to make it so the pressure doesn't happen in the first place. We want to set up a solution on the enemy team faster than they find a solution on us. Of course, all the resources can be used in the opposite sense to peel for the team, but I don't think that's what you're looking for. I think that's what you end up doing.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's move on to some 5v5 here.
Beautiful. Yeah, so what's your first thoughts? I actually haven't heard your thoughts on 5v5. Just 5
So,
seconds,
sure, I would say I've looked at 5v5. My first review of 5v5, I definitely had concerns, major concerns based on what we saw. It was a little hard to get too much of a read on both the first thing because we were looking at silver players and like the were maps that we didn't know and all that sort of thing. Yeah, and it's sort of like, oh, okay, I would love to know. Like, can you guys show me that route? Is there a flank route over there? What's going on, guys?
They don't know.
Right. It was probably like, and then I would say I had concerns when the first pro demo that we got during Owl, during the playoffs as well, where it was again, hey, like this is quite bursty, but also these pros don't look like they're playing very well. Like I look at it and I'm like, no one is. Go ahead.
So you kind of wanted a joyous endorsement from the pros after that as well, didn't you? In order to make you feel comfortable.
I don't necessarily need a joyous endorsement from the pros because I don't care what they think. Just like I think they're bad at the video game. I mean, but like
everyone's bad, including me and including everyone I coach.
Yes, exactly. I'm glad that you understand. Everyone is bad, including me. Perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. But what I'd say there is, like, again, they weren't playing the game correctly, and I was just sort of like, I don't know what to make of this because you guys like aren't setting up chokes ahead of the push bot, for example. So like, why are we playing this like this is the Overwatch 1 beta? Just
Yeah,
because this is a beta, we don't need to forget the game or anything like that. But then we got, and I've only actually reviewed one of them now, the Havana one I did review, but we actually saw structured play there, and that looked pretty doable to me. That actually really raised my stock, my opinion of what we're looking at quite significantly in terms of, yes, we're looking at a different game. Yes, dropping a tank is a big deal, but like
it's
Shock played
completely
in and
different.
what's that?
Completely different. Yeah,
Completely different game, but Shock was able to play in an organized way, do a spawn camp, use a strategy that we're mostly familiar with, and we were able to sort of see how that worked. And okay, when a team actually plays like a team, you do still see some level of your teamwork shenanigans matter, which of course teamwork, was always going to matter. Teamwork still matters in Call of Duty. Teamwork matters in, all
hmm
of these games. It does, but you were still able to see some of the heroes' unique identities and some of the like, hey, we can do these things because we have these hero options, and there is
sure.
resource donating and the such as we would talk about here.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
would say my opinion went up. Obviously, it's still different when you've only got 5 heroes on the board. And one of the things that's going to make that different is, hey, we have one less hero to cover the same amount of map. Means, are we playing with 2 angles more often than 3 right now? Or are
Yeah.
we still playing
Angle
with 3
control a little bit
angles?
harder.
Right. And then obviously, again, we know it's a lot more swingy with one person goes down. If you want to let teams get back into a fight after one person's gone down, everyone sort of has to be more powerful from a damage stance, which I
Yeah,
find a little frightening, but we'll see. I
and
don't just go ahead.
I have a lot of thoughts. As I said at the start, right? I wrote up.
Hmm.
God knows how many thousand words, how many pages I wrote on 5v5 before canning it and just saying, you know what, probably need to explain tanking first.
Sure.
Um,
Well, I think one of the Owl coach things they put on was it one of them went, what are your thoughts on how 5v5 is going to change? So you were just prepping for your Owl coaching position that you're going
ooh,
for there.
exciting. I can I just get my bell out and just start like just doomsaying for a
Oh,
bit.
sure, go for it. Go for it.
I'm the
That's fine.
doomsayer,
You can do
unfortunately.
say for a bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So obviously this guy right here, this lovely person here, the
Hmm.
off tank category's gone. Obviously, nobody to donate resources to the initiator.
Hmm.
So they are set adrift. Sorry, and Diva need to be solved. Obviously, I don't think Diva goes into the initiated category because she doesn't get a compounding effect from her engagements. I think
Well,
giving
hold
you.
on, because no one's going to
Sorry.
be donating resources anymore, right? There's no Zarya to donate
Mhm.
resources to Diva. There's no Zarya to donate resources to Reinhardt because
Sure.
Diva's the only one on the board. And I would say of the tanks, like I actually reviewed. Do you remember Skyline? Did you ever see Skyline?
Oh yeah, I absolutely love Skyline when he
I
was around.
actually just laughed because I just reviewed an old Skyline video where he was
I,
sort of
I
going over the comps, and he had Diva in the initiator category, and like she's kind of the closest in some ways of the off tanks to an initiator. So why does she
yeah,
not
she,
go into
she
the
she's
initiator category?
close to go into it, but
Okay,
and I saw that Skyline video just before coming up, and I was like, no,
nice,
Skyline exists, yeah.
nice.
Anyway, so yeah, she doesn't go into the initiator category because at the moment she has no compounding effect for extra resources being put
Okay.
into her. She does a lot, but I feel like all the effects from having more healing and say more healing, damage boost, speed, anything like that,
Hmm.
it's not multiplicative, it's not cleaving, it's just additive at the moment. And I feel like to
Sure.
make her an initiator properly, Blizzard need to get some kind of AoE effect into a kit. I think micros need to blow up for a big effect, and
Hmm.
being deeper in the enemy team gives you more AoE. Kind of that's the kind of stuff that I need to see in Diva's kit in order for her to move to initiator. Um,
What if
even
we
though there's
just
nobody
make
to
what
enable you.
if we
Yeah.
just make defense matrix twice as big as it currently is and last twice as long as it currently does, and then healing is a multiplicative effect because she can stay there DMing a stupid amount of the map for longer. How about that? Oh wait, she used to do that.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. I feel like if they want to put her in the initiator category, which I
Sure.
think they obviously do, there needs to be cleave. There needs to be some sort of cleave. Zarya can't, for the most part, just because of mobility. She's also not close range, but she has no cleave to speak of. She doesn't get a compounding effect from, and I do think it's to do with
Hmm.
range in that the closer you are in, the more you're at
I
risk
mean,
of
Zarya's
everything,
just
and the more
gonna
heal you
need
need.
like a Doomfist or a Reaper or a May in every comp. Like, if you're gonna run Zarya, you're gonna have to have something that you can. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Reliably use your bubbles on there,
In which case, you're
or
just playing
Go ahead.
We're just playing two tanks in a different way, right?
Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Zarya's set adrift right now. She's gonna have to go over to the poking tank category. She's gonna have to be able to donate her resources better to DPS. I think it was a good step adding 2 bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously they didn't have it. I think they literally just miscoded it, so it was on the wrong cooldown. But she
Miscoded
needs to be
what?
able
So
to,
it was on the wrong
yeah.
cooldown. You lost me.
I think it had a very long cooldown in the preview,
Oh,
so
got it.
Zarya was trash.
Okay.
I think it was meant to be 5. It's turned out to be 10 seconds per bubble, which is ridiculous. So maybe split that up into more. Maybe 4. Right? Lots of little bursts to keep DPS in an angle. Right? Not a really big burst one time. Okay, that's the kind of thing that Zarya needs.
I don't know about
So-
that because, like, even if you make the bubbles have less health, like 100 health or 50 health or something like that, unless they
Sure.
change their trait of we just absorb infinite damage for 1 hit and we cure,
Yeah.
we cleanse things like that. Like, the idea of, hey, every time my Doomfist, like, Doomfist has a 4-second cooldown on punch. If I can bubble Doomfist as he just goes in constantly, no thank you.
There had to be an internal cooldown in it, so you can't just press it 4 times, right? I'm
Okay.
thinking like 1 second cooldown between bubbles, but 4 maybe. Something like that, so you can't just like repeatedly spam, maybe 2 seconds.
Right, but even if
kinda
I
like
can
the
just
Hammer,
like
yeah.
bubble every single time my Doomfist is ready to, okay, I don't know. Maybe that's okay. I see where you're going.
Obviously, it needs balance. It needs thinking about. I haven't really considered Zarya too hard at the moment. But down here, I think we got a real big problem. What do you think the problem is? Why haven't we seen these heroes yet?
The poke tanks.
Yeah, why haven't we seen them?
Okay, so if we look at our poke tanks, why have we not seen our poke tanks yet? So I would guess
There's a
because
problem,
we're trying
Temporal.
to. There's a problem. Okay, so if we're thinking about those, it's because we're trying to set the game up to be faster, and it's obvious that we're trying to set the game up to be faster. Would be one thing that I'd
True.
look at there, and they need more time to do work. They don't actually need more time to do work. You can condense them. You could make them open windows you could make Arissa's barrier have less health, be on a longer cooldown, and give her more damage, and she still conceptually works. You've just compressed her time. But I don't think that's really what they want to do.
We're struggling to find a different design for them. I think the problem is double shield. I think it's the same problem. I think if you make their shields good enough that they can stand on an angle and retreat in a straight line, they are actually just ridiculously overpowered. If they are good enough to exist on their own with shields, they are good enough to enable bunker. I think that's the problem.
They're good enough to exist on their own with shields. They're good enough to enable bunker, and that's a problem. I see where you're coming from. I'm just thinking about it. Go ahead.
Yeah, how did we break double shield to begin with? Well, we had to make Orisa and Sigma weak enough that they can't stand together. Okay, and sure, yeah, gold players, plat players, diamond players, they'll still stand in the same spot. They're like, if we're talking about Hanamura, they'll be on the right side high ground, just sitting there with 2 shields. But that's not how you play double shield. You play it with split sightlines with multiple different angles. But if you only have one character, we cannot weaken it, both characters, to the point where they have to be played on different sightlines. We end up having to have one shield on one sightline, and if you can't break that shield or you can't rotate past it, you end up in a really again degenerate game space. This is the double shield problem.
Well, except that if you've got that, like, you break it the same way that you've always broken it, and maybe it's just I'm too used to higher level play in terms of how I think about this stuff, and I'm not considering the rest of the ladder enough, but, like, you set up a bunker, and I didn't really have an issue with our original bunker some of these things, because I went, okay, we'll throw Winston Diva Hammond at you as a combination plus Genji, and they're going to break it, or we'll throw Hanzo Fair at you from range, and we'll break it, or we'll set up a bunch of angles, and if we have 3 different angles on your bunker, well, 3 different angles breaks a double shield bunker. Breaking a single shield bunker with 3 different angles, that's still going to be cake. So, like, is that really go ahead.
If Orissa's strong enough to be played, she's strong enough to bunker. I think that's the problem.
Okay.
I don't think there's a design space for her at the moment where she can't bunker. I think these tanks can only exist with their shield in context of another shielding tank, and them having to split angles or be bad, right? If we play Orisa Hog on the same angle, we are currently screwing up, right?
Right.
And I think Blizzard are definitely afraid of double shield. I think they don't want to do it again. I think they think tanks are the root of all cause. Obviously, goats existing and then double shield. I think they hate tanks. I think they want to steer clear of this. And they found in their playtest with gold players or silver players that you know what, it's just bunker again. We may as well just pick bunker. And they just canned it. They're just saying, you know what, we need to completely redesign them, but they don't know what to do. I don't think they know, at least. Otherwise, we probably would have seen it already, to be honest.
Why? Like, I mean, that could be, but it could also just be that, hey, our tank players don't particularly like. I mean, it could be, what the players that we're playtesting with. We were playtesting with.
Uh, at this point,
I'm
there's been
reaching.
enough.
I'm reaching. I know. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
the pro players weren't allowed to play them either. I'm definitely confident that this is due to double shield. So
Okay.
now we've got Diva. We can put her in the initiating category. It's going to take some work. Zarya, we can just about put her in the poke tank category, donating DPS to resources to the DPS. That is. Then we have Orisa and Sigma set adrift, right? And the only place I see them going is the hog design space. That's the only place I see them going. Or they have to be smart enough to give them different resources to donate to the DPS. Which let's see what the resource we wanted. Slow heals, slow speed boost over a long period of time onto a DPS. AOE kind of like DPS effects, like small overshield, that kind of stuff. That is the kind of stuff we want to give to them. But can't do it with a shield, otherwise we end up with bunker.
I think this isn't strictly true here. What I really mean when I say you don't do it with shields, I mean you can't do it with static shields. You could apply a shield in front of someone, and that could block stuff for a personal use for DPS, but you can't have these like all-encompassing team stand behind these shields, otherwise that would encourage grouping.
And bunker, we think, is a problem with a single shield. I mean, like, with a double shield, bunker is definitely rough, and we think that single shield bunker is just going to be oppressive and terrible to play against in gold and silver.
I think that Blizzard is scared enough that when they see it in their play test, they think none of this. We don't want any of it. Right? We want the game to be fast and dynamic. We don't want it to be MOBA-ish. And so they just stay clear of it. The other thing is, if Orisa Sigma can be played on the same angle with two shields, they are too strong.
Right, but again, you can't pick both heroes in 5v5, so I'm not sure, like...
Yeah, no, that's my simple design point, right? If you can pick both of them, they're too strong. So if we have one shield and it can be played on its own, it's too strong. Because this is fixed by making them go different directions, by making them bad enough that they have to, but this can't be fixed by making them go to different directions. So this one you can just nerf them until they're okay.
I mean, that's sort of true. I see where you're going now. That's sort of true, except that it was a problem. What makes it too powerful, if they can stack their shields together, is that they're then broken powerful if they actually know how to play the game and split. Like, that I think is how we're thinking about. But guess what? They can play the game correctly and split doesn't exist in 5v5. So is it a problem if they're broken powerful, would be the next question.
I think they're either enabling bunker or too weak to be played. That's simply why I see them put. Or their shields just go away to the point that they don't matter. Right?
So you just think bunker just can't be in the game. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
Okay.
You think bunker can't be in the game because you think that's too slow in the repeated attempts, but is that really any different than repeatedly trying to push into a Reinhardt that's holding a corner that you just can't break? Like, why can't...
Blizzard thinks it does. I think Blizzard thinks it is. I seriously, the reaction to double shield basically forced them to give up on tanks, I'm pretty sure, in general. I think they were just so unhappy that they screwed it up with goats. It took so long to fix. They had so many ideas, but they didn't have this thing to tell them how to fix it. And then...
Well, I mean, we knew what the issue with the goats was pretty quick. They were just super slow with the... Like, and you might say, oh no, we were wrong, we were a little bit wrong, but they were just so hesitant to do big changes. Like, they released a huge change in the form of Brig to create goats, and then they were so small with the changes that they did over time.
Chipping away DPS changes and that sort of thing.
Right.
They didn't really know what was going on. That was the big issue with goats. And I don't think they fully knew what was going on with Double Shield. They just kind of just nerfed them until it went away. And I think they kind of like paralyzed, not wanting to make anything that will do that again, right? And I think that's another reason, not just the declining player base of tanks.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other reason is them not wanting to design new tanks in this format because they think it's just gonna, we're gonna release it, it's gonna be broke every time.
Huh, you nerf
What's the
tanks and you
point?
have a declining player base of tanks. I wonder how that works. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, yeah. The other side of it is, as I said earlier, the pigeonholing problem with tanks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty much done with 5v5. That's really.
Okay.
I see all of these guys here. Obviously, Hog can be as he is. I see these going towards Hog.
Okay, so you think they're all
Or
going to go
whether-
towards Hog, who's just going to be a beefy DPS effectively. You don't see us
Mhm.
turning Hog into a more serious tank. I mean, we've, experimented with some of the, is Cloud that protects other people type thing. But
Which is a
again,
great
that would,
example of donating resources to DPS, right?
right,
That's like reasonably good. It just doesn't go far enough.
right,
In terms of the wings, I
right.
was
And
happy with that.
as long as you put that on a reasonable cooldown, that's fine. I can see that, and you could, in theory, do
Oh,
that. You're just
oh,
thinking they don't want to
oh
do that
no, I
with
hit pen.
barriers. Did you kill your epic pen? Why'd you do that?
Yeah, I pressed the bin button. So we
Oh,
got initiators.
okay.
Uh,
Yeah, no, I can see it, and you just think they can't do it with shields, and my chat is in here agreeing with you. So, okay, I see it. I see it. Okay, that makes sense in terms of what you wanted to cover on 5v5 there. I think we've
um,
really. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Are you trying to summarize?
No, I think we've hit some good spaces here. I mean, obviously, we talked about this. We talked about your categories. I think they're a reasonable way to categorize. I mean, obviously, if I want to, I can keep poking at them. I can keep pulling it apart. But I think you've defended this to a point where it's like, yep, that makes sense. And to the point that, yes, let's justify using this for thinking about the game in a different way and for
Mhm.
thinking about the design space. And I think you've correctly highlighted that if we were to continue with 6v6, that this off tank that donates resources to tanks is probably the most interesting design space to go more into. And now we've moved on to 5v5, and what do we think about that? And
Mhm.
we're sort of into this off tank space that again was potentially the most interesting. Those are the ones that really need to be solved, because what we're going to have is we're going to have initiator tanks left, and then we're going to have tanks that support DPS, because there is no supporting of tanks as we move into this
Yeah.
5v5 area.
And then
So
as a side part with DPS and healers, obviously it isn't discussing tanks, but I think we've got a problem with DPS. I think they are going to hate it because there's going to be way more healers supporting the DPS in 5v5, and I don't think DPS particularly like having a fight against someone that's double pocketed. I really don't. I don't
yeah,
think they're going to enjoy it more.
I
I
think
don't
you've
think it's
got a
going to be good.
point there, because effectively you either have your initiator tanks, who I think is what everyone wants. Everyone wants there's a Reinhardt for us to shoot at, there's a Winston for
Hmm.
us to shoot at type thing. But I think you're right. We're going to move some of these off tanks over. I mean, they effectively have to move because there's no tank for them to support, whether we move them or not, to a we're supporting DPS. And yeah, now you're up against a
Yeah,
Reaper that
Mercy Zen.
gets double Harmony Orb plus Zarya bubbles. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, what are you supposed to
It's the
do type
Murphy's
thing?
Engine, right? We're just
Uh,
going to use angular solutions because you only have one tank, right? We're just
right.
going to push ourselves to the wings and then play these resources that go far away from where we are, and we're going to double pocket the DPS in a strong angle, and they're going to go over there and they're going to win. Right? I feel like that's where we're headed. So I
Um,
don't think DPS are going to like that.
Yeah, they're probably not. On the other hand, I'm just thinking about that for a second. They're probably not. On the other hand, initiation could really be a problem. Like, we could be a thing where,
Mhm.
hey, if you don't run an initiator, like we talked about Zarya giving bubbles, but no one else does a great job currently of giving resources. Like, okay, so it's not that no one else does a good job. It's no one else gives resources that are really strong enough to start fights with, I guess, is what I'd get into there to push in. So it comes down
Yeah,
to
well,
angles. Go ahead.
on the other side, the resources that the DPS have to fight against or cancel out the pressure cycles are less. So I feel like the initiators are going to be absolutely fine. They're just going to rebalance it around the initiators having less resources put into them for the most part. Um,
Who's
I
willing to push? Like, one of the complaints that we've heard from some places is it going to turn into corner holding simulator? As we drop a tank from this, is the game going to turn into no one's
oh,
willing to start fights because it's too dangerous and you just get blown up, especially with
uh,
one less tank on the board? Go ahead.
definitely not. If we have like the 3-lane model of Overwatch,
Hmm.
right? The thing that people always obviously oversimplified, but you know what? useful here. We have the free lane model of Overwatch. No matter
Mhm.
where we put a tank, like if we put Initiator here, here, or
Mhm.
here,
Mhm.
what's going to happen is we're going to find 2 DPS fights here and here. If we put someone here, they're just going to happen over there with the Mercy. Like people will just yeet themselves over to the other lines in order to take these fights at an advantage with extra healing. And the tanks are going to feel like everything's going on. They can't do anything about it. Like
Sure. Well,
that's how I feel about it.
that could potentially be fine, but can you jump into a lane that's already being held by a DPS in these situations where they're clearly trying to balance healing down? Like they've told us that they're probably not going to keep these only 75% healing, the
Yeah.
reduced healing type thing, but clearly whether they do it like that or some other way, they want less healing in the game. So like, are you going to be able to open on a DPS? Like if you've got your tank in your left lane there, and then you're in a situation where, okay, the tank is in the left lane, I'm also in the left lane, I want to swap lanes to not have to deal with this tank. Well, can I swap into a lane that already has a tracer on it when healing is at such a premium, into a lane that already has an
Yeah.
Ashe in it when healing's at such a premium, and I'm not going to get help to break that sort of thing?
Yeah, and maybe since the lanes and swapping the lanes is going to be so much more important now, maybe Winston and Bull just get better because they can change over the lanes better and just like put their pressure where it's needed away from the enemy tank. I think Ryan's going to get left behind for the most part.
Okay. That's
Obviously,
that is a bold
Tank
prediction to
will
make
charge.
for most of the player base, that Ryan
Yeah,
is going to get left
no, no,
behind.
obviously that's talking about high levels when people actually understand
Yes.
going on different lanes. But Reinhardt's charge is going to be helpful to him, and I think that's a good step in the right direction.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if it's going to be enough.
Okay.
Another thing is the throughput healers, as I call them, and we disagree in healer definitions as well as tank definitions.
Oh,
By the way,
excellent.
just so you know, it's
Except I don't
wonderful.
call anything a healer; they're all supports. But go ahead.
Excellent. So I have throughput healers who generate solutions through ult
Sure.
charge, and that's obviously Moira, Bap, and Anna. And then I categorize Zen in the other one, whereas most people do the opposite. Zen, Mercy, Brig, and then Lucio down here. These guys combine together. These guys combine across the lanes, and Lucio obviously combines across the lanes. That's how I do it. And these guys, their job is to put the resources into the wide angles and push left and right kind of thing. Whereas obviously at a high level, all of these characters want to put their resources into the best spot in the angles, regardless.
Right.
But realistically, if I'm coaching a gold player, Anna's perfectly fine played in a simplistic way.
Tell me more about this
And
Moira
then-
Zen comp because you said it was okay to combine across the lane. So tell me more about this Moira
Tell
Zen
me
comp
more
here.
tell me more about this Bap Zen comp you keep running in high levels. Yeah, nothing works
No,
perfectly.
Bap Zen is fine at high levels. It's Moira
That's
Zen.
what I mean.
Oh, okay.
If you
Got
run
it.
both
Got it.
as
Yes, if you put them
yeah.
the other way. I think we've mostly just said our solution to that is we're going to call BAP both a main support and a flex support. But okay.
Yeah. So they're kind of like basing it on your ult rotation and trying to like focus on ult versus focusing on pushing the DPS angles. Like I kind of focus on that. It is a little bit simplistic, but it helps people kind of root what they want to do in the game. I mean, if you just play Baptiste around getting as much ult charge as possible, it kind of roots you in doing the DPS and healing at the same time. Anna's kind of the same thing, and Moira obviously ult charge is everything, right? So
I'm with you on Moira and Anna.
Throughput.
Oh, got it. Sorry, thank you. I'm looking at that and I'm going, which support starts with the T? Okay, got it. Okay, so I'm probably with you on Moira and Anna. I don't necessarily know that I'm with you on BAP because BAP is just like, no, I just want to do as much damage. Like, BAP does.
But that's ult charge, right? Everything's ult charge.
But so is Zen. Like it's not that I necessarily want Transcendence. The Transcendence is great. I want to do as much damage as possible. So like.
Sure.
Why is that?
The resources that I use and the stuff that I do is going to be more based on making sure I'm pushing strong angles than it will be based on just making sure that I can do the maximum amount of stuff. Right? Zen's going to always eat himself up to high ground and find a preventative solution against a DPS pushing it and throw his Harmony Orb onto that high ground or to do the same. Whereas I wouldn't want Anna pulling themselves up to high ground or to duel a DPS as much. Obviously, they should do, but people aren't particularly as good at it until higher levels. I think the priorities it gives you is a bit better.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not gonna open the support wormhole any further. I think.
What I really meant is that I meant the throughput healers here have no real home. The ones that like work around ult charge, Anna has a home with Winston in
Mhm.
5v5.
Mhm.
Baptiste is in a struggling spot because you know what? Moira players are done, okay? They are not going to be able to donate their resources to the wings unless they just increase Moira's damage, make her more of a damage dealer. Like these characters,
I mean,
Zen,
you can
Murphy,
always
and Brig.
shorten ball. You can always shorten Orb's
Mhm.
cooldown or Fade's cooldown and increase Fade's distance. Like those
Yeah,
would be the two ways that she could go about that. But okay.
I guess what I'm saying is that like literally everything needs a rework in order to go into 5v5. Literally everything.
Kinda,
They're,
yeah.
they're, they're kind of just tipping their table over and starting again. And I'm not sure if I trust Blizzard to start rebalancing a game again.
Well, especially in this timeline is the real concern.
Yeah,
It's clear that they're not balanced enough for how soon the game comes out. Like it's clear,
yeah.
unfortunately, how little work has been done.
So this is why I'm getting my bell out, right? And
Okay.
I'm not comfortable because I know if I go through the cast list right now,
Mhm.
I will see not even 3 cores, more than that of the heroes are going to need something, and I know they don't know what it is. I might know, but they certainly don't know. Okay, I could probably
Sure.
come up with a reasonable idea, but it's flip a coin on Blizzard
Okay.
getting the right path.
No.
Not even
I mean,
balancing, like
Blizzard,
getting the right
the
path.
the whole point of the 5v5, whether they realize it or not, like they would say, no, we're doing 5v5 because we want it to be faster paced. We want this. This is what the market demands. Really, the reason for 5v5 is it's enough of a media attention piece. It's enough of a
Mhm.
change to really make sure that, hey, they made a big change. Maybe this game is going to be great again. I'm willing to give this another shot to all those people who absolutely hated ranked because they hated goats, because they hated double shield, because they hated getting dived too hard as supports. Like the people who quit the game over time, 5v5 is a big enough change to get people to check it out, to have a chance of making their
Mhm.
franchise successful
Uh,
again.
I'm, I'm
So they're like,
I'm
it's
pretty
like
sure you
putting a
said it
pinch.
before.
It's sorry, what's that?
I'm pretty sure you said it before.
Yeah.
The thing that gets people to come back to a game isn't the game being different. It's the marketing of the game
Right.
continuously popping up in their feed,
Right.
right? So as long as the game is refreshed new with
Mhm.
cinematics and that kind of thing, has constant content, the game's going to get people back. They don't
Right.
need to do this massive change of the format because the format was never really the issue. Their bad balancing with goats and double shield was more the issue.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, people left over time, but people left over time because no content, no streamers, and it just doesn't solve the problem. I think people like this is kind of like I find the last ditch effort when I
Sure.
talk to people about 5v5. They say everything. They're like, you know what? They struggle to balance tanks. I'm like, here's how to balance tanks. You're gonna be okay. And then they go on to the oh no, it's just kind of like the last ditch effort of you know what? They just need a marketing push. They don't need a marketing push. They literally have departments making cinematics for them,
Cinematics, yeah.
right? It's so, it's so difficult because this is why I started with the basics of explaining tanks.
Mhm.
Because if you don't explain tanks first, I'm gonna get well actually'd 5 million times when I actually say what I think about 5v5. It's all
Sure.
gonna be wait until it releases. You don't know, like you couldn't
Well, but
know.
there's always going to be people doing that because people don't want you to poo-poo on their hobby, this thing that they've
Yeah.
poured thousands of hours into their life, and they want to hold on, and I totally get it. And this is not me saying they don't have a chance because Blizzard is doing things right to ratchet it up for them to have a chance of being successful in some ways. The problem is they then have to stick the landing. PvP has to be fun. And again, they've prepped things right. They'll have their cinematics. They're going to do their media releases. They'll do the things right. The problem is they have to actually stick that landing, and that would be the
It's
concern.
already fun. It's the best state it's been since
This is
release.
literally the best Overwatch has been since release. I know. Like,
It's already
we've
good. They
figured
just
out
won't
that.
come back because nothing's happening.
Right. I know. But that's the thing. If you do things, you do potentially make it worse. That is,
No, let's just
unfortunately.
flip the table. No, we're flipping the table. It's all right, come forward. We're going home. We're flipping the table. Let's restart everything. You know what? Remove a character, redesign 8% of the cast. It'll be fine.
Uh,
Ah,
I
get my
I
bell
hear
out. Sorry.
you. I hear you, but like in some ways you do get to they put themselves here through their own mistakes, but what choice did they really have? Like they pulled the plug and said we're not going to release any new heroes. We're going to work on Overwatch 2 and then promptly didn't work on Overwatch 2 for a year. So like that was a problem, but leading up to that, like we can't rewrite history here. They gave us a season of goats and owl. They gave us like a season that was absolutely hated. We got double shield after that. Before that, like again, we had, they'd made decisions to design strictly in support's favor because people didn't like getting dove too hard in dive. Before that, like we were in a place where what was the move that could have like at what point they were supposed to make a different move besides balance better? Like, they can't at this point when the game is good. I'd say for the last year, actually, the game has been in a very good place from a balance standpoint, even though maybe McCree was a little overtuned, maybe BAP was a little overtuned, Echo maybe was a little overtuned. Even though you had that stuff, they couldn't like back out of their "we're going to release Overwatch 2" statement. And if they'd started releasing new heroes again, do you think that makes the media hit to get people to check out the game when they've already announced Overwatch 2?
They have to release it as Overwatch 2. They
Mhm.
just need to release new heroes with the game's release. And if they want more tank players to come back, they just have to release like 3 or 4 tanks.
What
And
if
it's
you?
not particularly hard to release 3 or 4 tanks. It
Okay.
really isn't. Not in terms of making them, obviously. You know, it
Mhm.
will give Blizzard all benefit for designing interesting things.
Sure.
And sure, I'm sure they do it at the best time they can. But in terms of the design space here, I guarantee you that if they have this and this, like these combinations, the way that I've set it up, I think they even they can't screw it up. I think they'd be okay.
Okay.
I just don't know how much of the swapping to 5v5s, how much of the declining tank player base, how much of it is them being scared of making tanks because tanks always fuck up their game, and how much of it is this marketing push thing that they're going for. Well, everyone's saying what they're
How
going for.
how many heroes need to be released for Overwatch 2 to not get a negative backlash over the few number of heroes released?
More than they will release is the answer.
Really? You don't think if they released like 15 heroes that would be like, "Oh, yep, that's fine."
No. I mean, I doubt they're going to do more than 5. Do you think they're going to do more than 5?
See, I think 8 is probably the threshold where if they sneak 8 heroes in there, we'll probably mostly, not
Yeah,
grumble about it.
alright, okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
like
Yeah.
I think that's
I
about
guess,
the
I guess I'm happy.
right. I think that's about the threshold, and you think we're going to get about 5.
I
And the
think
reason you think
probably about
that
5.
is because they have to do such significant reworks, which you're right
Every
about.
single character's something on every single character, and then they have to balance it against each other, which isn't that hard if you know how to balance it against each other. But you know what, Brig, Sigma, Orisa, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. And
Okay.
if I was to choose the categories into the current game, I
Hmm.
do 1 heal, I do 3 tanks, and I do 1
Hmm.
DPS. I think the
Okay.
healer category is actually pretty healthy, to be honest. I think it's fine. It's not good, but it's fine. And
Okay.
like they're going to release a DPS because they have to. 3 tanks are needed. 1-1-1. There you go. That's how to do it.
Okay. Okay. I see it. Okay, that's fair. Um, that was an interesting conversation, but I think rather than open another topic, I think we come to the end of it here.
Yeah,
But
I think I've said all of that. I came here to stay in my
good.
tirade.
Go. That's fine. I'm glad. It was an interesting tirade. It was interesting to see. I was glad I got the chance to poke at some things a little bit, make you flesh them out because you did a good job there, and this was fun. Do you have any final thoughts, questions, major takeaways that viewers should be like, this is really something that you didn't get to cover that you think is important, or do you feel like you've covered everything you need here?
No, I think I'm mostly good. If I want to flesh anything out, I'll flesh out in the content that I will eventually create in late 2022 because I'm so slow at creating stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Um, yeah, no, I think I'm mostly okay. You don't need to think about the tanks in this way. I want to be very clear. Like this Orisa not being
Right.
a main tank, if it helps you to think of her as a main tank in order to improve at the game, that's cool. But just remember, she's going wide. She's not going in the middle, right? If you can go wide, go wide.
Well, Reinhardt
Um,
doesn't have to go down the middle either. I mean, you find Rhinewood on Hollywood Roof. I'm pretty
yeah,
happy with
yeah.
that. Like I'd say
I
that's
think
a
it's more worse Orisa's being down main than Ryan.
okay.
But everyone should be in the most interesting spot you possibly could be on the map permanently.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. I am getting a request from my chat to talk about the 25% healing reduction while characters are taking damage, and I don't feel the need to talk about that because more than we have because I feel like they've told us that they actually don't want to do that on the Blizzard forums, that they want to do something else. I think we'll get something similar to that where it might not be that, they might just reduce healing output across the board. Do you have a different thought there, or do you think?
I got
Oh,
my bell out. It tells me they don't know what they're doing.
thank you, thank you.
Uh, they knew they were doing this. Why didn't they come up with something they were at least moderately confident about? Right? I get it. There's
Sure.
loads of changes, but there's not really that many, to be honest. Haven't done that much to the game, so why release one of these things that is like, I don't know. Yeah.
Fair. I mean, I think you're allowed to have some level of experimenting in a beta of, do we want to lower healing while in combat? Do we want to lower healing in general? And like,
Oh yeah.
again, their playtesters are silver, so maybe like they needed the feedback of the pros actually doing it. Now, could they have gotten a bunch of, good tier 3 players to go do this testing before Overwatch League? Probably. But hey, we'll deal.
I certainly think they could have if they wanted to, but you know what? They're very secretive as a company, so they're not going to let secrets get out like that. I don't think
No,
they
it's much easier
disclose.
with the L players who they have under contracts and they can burn if NDAs and such. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, then I think we're good. It's been great to have you on. Maybe, I'm sure we'll find some excuse to do this again. Maybe I'll write an enraging
Hopefully.
piece next time. Who knows? But
Arresta me off tank. Jesus.
probably not
It's
that
been
one, but
absolutely
maybe.
wonderful. It's really nice to talk to you. It's been a long time coming, to be honest. I've been watching your content pretty much, especially every single time you do something that I don't have to look at. It's in the car on the way to work.
There you go.
On your phone kind of thing.
Nice.
But yeah, thank you.
Nice. Absolutely. It was great to have you. I'm going to go ahead and call it here. Guys, remember, if it's not already linked in the description, it will be afterwards, but definitely go check out the content over here. We'll have the link to the Twitch, the YouTube. We've already linked the Reddit thread there. Definitely go take a look. And, streams earlier than I do in terms of, well, from my stream time zone, streams earlier than I do. So good thing to do
Yeah.
while I'm not around, too.
English time,
There we go.
not American time. That's good.
There we go. Okay. Good to see you, man. Talk to you soon.
I see you too.
Well, this was incredibly fun, not just to do, but to edit. I'd like to properly thank Temporal again for having a nice big chat with me all the way back then. It was absolutely wonderful. I'm glad to be able to edit this now, and I hope everyone has got as much as they could out of it. So thank you very much for listening. I'll see you soon.